Good afternoon, everybody. Time for the inquiry to resume. Just a couple of things, I think. In terms of the landscape evidence and how that should be dealt with in terms of Mr. Woods, I do think on reflection that there are different sites, and landscape evidence does clearly in part relate to the specific site. So I am prepared to let both advocates ask questions of Mr. Woods, but the site-specific section of his proof which deals with A and B is limited to one paragraph, as far as I can see, at 9.8. So I anticipate that one examination chief is going to be extremely brief. It's for you two to work out how to deal with it. Most of it is common. And I don't want any duplication at all.
So I'm grateful for that. So what I suggest for the moment is that Mr. Cottle leads off.
Well, it's up to the two of you. I don't need to we don't need to decide that now. You can sort this out between you. In terms of plans for sites A and B, I don't know whether the parties have had a chance to look at this over the lunch adjournment. I know it was a shorter lunch adjournment than normal. If you haven't, come back to.
I haven't yet.
I mean, I have had a quick look at what I've got, and I'm not at the moment. They seem to be okay. I don't know what the council's view is. They don't seem to be inconsistent with each other and with the composite that the council has prepared. But there may be something I'm missing, or that I'm not fully aware of.
Well, I would probably need Mr. Ward just to deal with that, just to if you've got a specific issue to put to him. Because,
no, I haven't. I on the face of it, what I've got seems to be all right. But
it seems to be all right.
But Mr. Cottle's raised a concern in my mind, which I want to put to bed.
Well, I've always understood that the local authority have no difficulty about the location of our site. And I was only responding to you raising it to begin with, that there seemed to be a discrepancy, and I'd noticed there was a point that was raised in some of the flooding evidence about the position of the boundary. That was all.
There was, and I think it was the flood witness for the local authority, Mr. Smythe, who produced the composite in the first place. But my concern initially when I got the papers was with sites C and D, which I wasn't sure, and I think we had corrected plans for those. Yeah. So my feeling at the moment is that things are probably okay, but I'd like reassurance on that, because obviously it's a key point.
Well, as far as we're concerned, you're right, things are okay, and I did indicate to my learned friend at the outset that as far as we were concerned, things were okay, and certainly Mr. Ward, who's the evidence, the person responsible for the evidence on this matter, he said in his rebuttal that he thinks everything is fine, and he's put that plan in as an exhibit.
It's just Mr. Cottle who's unsure about the boundary of his site.
I was responding to your question, sir.
So I mean, that's all. That's as far as I can.
You set a hair running, Mr. Cottle. That's the trouble.
Sorry, I should have said
I admire your confidence, Mr. Masters. Well, I think, Mr. Cottle, just so that I am entirely happy, if you would double check perhaps with Mr. Woods and come back tomorrow.
And it is relevant if you were allowing one appeal and not allowing another.
Yeah.
So could I add in something of housekeeping before we move on? I know we're going to get to landscaping at some time. Of course, my witness on appeals C and D is on landscaping is Mr. Rowe, who I only realised wasn't going to be here today when he rang me this morning to tell me, but I've chatted with him about that, and he was working from an earlier version of your timetable, and misunderstood whether he'd be needed or not. But he will be here tomorrow. So I am asking you whether or not we could fit Mr. Rowe in tomorrow if we get that far on landscaping today. I think we'll go over to tomorrow anyway.
Mr. Rowan landscaping for tomorrow.
Yes.
It's when he's down.
Is that when he's down?
Yeah,
Okay.
tomorrow morning.
Well, that's why perhaps he's not here. I hadn't.
I've no idea, but he's down for tomorrow morning.
That's fine then. Thank you, sir. I'd forgive me if I hadn't realised that.
Okay. I said we'd start. Is there anything else before we get back to general need?
No,
If not, I said we'd start with Councillor Stern. She had a statement on need that she wanted. Did you manage to get copies, Councillor? Yes, please. It'd be easier for us to just save us writing unnecessarily. Have you got one for each of the other parties? Good, thank you.
thank you very much.
Okay, Councillor Stern, it's
I'll skip the bit about who I am. I think everybody knows now. Bramley Parish is a long, narrow parish, approximately 5 miles as the crow flies in length. Approximately 70% of the parish population of circa 3,700 people reside in the northeastern settlement of Bramley Village, with most of the remainder in the hamlets of Thorncombe Street, Smithbrook, Rushet Common, Palmer's Cross and Graham. And then there are also scattered farms and houses and cottages across the parish. And then at the southernmost end, we have Lydia Park and Weeping Willows traveller sites, just inside the boundary with Alfold. In recent years, the parish council has become increasingly concerned about the rapid expansion of illegal traveller sites springing up at this south end of our parish and adjacent to the well-established Lydia Park, which has existed in relative harmony with our local community since it was first approved in 1997. So I'm not going to speak about anything else, but my statement is concerned with numbers and meeting genuine demands for GTR sites. The Waverley TAA was updated in 2022 in response to the inspector's questions during the examination of the local plan part 2. The TAA concluded that at the base date in 2017, there was a need for 27 additional pitches, and this has been since updated to 36 for existing households and up to 24 additional pitches from unknown households that were unable to be interviewed. Since the 1st of April 2017, the council has granted permission for 57 additional pitches within the borough. An application for a further 3 pitches at Kilnside Place in Badshot-Lee is pending, and there are allocations apparently for a further 9 sites in the draft local plan part 2. Table 1 gives you the locations of these 9 sites that have been allocated. In the last 10 years, the number of traveller caravans in Waverley recorded by the Department for Levelling and Communities has more than doubled from the 137 reported in January 2014 to 365 in July 2024. This expansion, 165%, is more than 5 times that of the whole of England, where the number of caravans has increased from 19,500 to over 26,600, which is 36% over the same time period. Of the 365 recorded in July 2024, only 236 were authorised, while 116 were unauthorised and 13 were on socially rented sites. And according to a 2024 count by Waverley, there were 198 static caravans on the sites in the Stovolds Hill area in a single location at the south end of Bramley Parish. And table 2, you will see lists these. So, of the 364 caravans in Waverley, 198 of these are situated on or adjacent to Lydia Park, i.e. the small parish of Bramley, circa 3,700 residents and less than 3% of the total population of Waverley, is already accommodating more than half of Waverley's traveller population. The combined populations of Alfold, Bramley, Dunsfold and Hascombe at circa 6,300 account for less than 5% of Waverley's total population. I've already mentioned that the village settlement area in the northeastern part of our parish accounts for around 70% of our residents, with the remaining scattered around the hamlets and single houses and farms to the north of Lydia Park. None of the areas surrounding Lydia Park, including Alfold, Dunsfold and Hascombe, have anything near the population density of the traveller sites on Stovolds Hill. In fact, the nearest settled community comprises just 21 houses in Alfold. And I would remind people that the decision to allow the original gypsies to remain on site at Lydia Park was made by John Prescott in 1997. And there was a legal agreement to secure these restrictions, which included limiting the number of pitches to 22, i.e. at that point, the local settled community would not be dominated by the traveller population. So the whole thing seems to appear to be in conflict with the government 2023 paper, Planning Policy for Traveller Sites, wherein Policy C14 states that when assessing the suitability of sites in rural or semi-rural settings, local planning authorities should ensure that the scale of such sites does not dominate the nearest settled community. And I would point out that this was a key factor in the dismissing of a previous appeal, reference number given there, for 4 pitches in this same field by Planning Inspector Joanna Gilbert in September 2022. Recently, with the increase of caravans on unauthorised sites, such as these coming before the inquiry, Bramley Parish Council was disturbed to note that units were being advertised for rent on Facebook Marketplace. So we picked out random dates. We picked out, there were 9 in August, last August, 13 in September, 5 in October. And we've also observed that multiple units are now occupied by outsiders. Since date of the last, when this inquiry was supposed to start, another 5 units were available to rent in May of this year. I believe that Waverley has done even more extensive research than us in this matter. And the examples are given in Bramley's evidence numbers 1, 2, 3 and 4. Bramley residents spoke to some of these renters in the White Horse pub in Hascombe, who confirmed that they responded to these advertisements and are now living in the said homes, for which the rent was circa £800 to £900 a month, i.e. much less than you can get for anything else in our area. And the owners, landlords of these mobile homes for rent are all names associated with occupants of legitimate Lydia Park and Weeping Willows mobile homes. Bramley Parish Council notes that planning permissions for units at Lydia Park and others are accompanied by the condition that they are for occupation by the applicant traveller family, and such sites shall not be occupied by any persons other than gypsies and travellers. Therefore, such letting of units to anyone is in breach of condition, as well as being unlicensed and unregulated. That such mobile homes are advertised for rent suggests that these units are surplus to requirements. Bramley Parish Council therefore concludes that there is no need for additional static caravan sites and that the Doherty family needs could very well be met by existing available authorised units. Acquisition of unsport green fields by travellers from Lydia Park and Weeping Willows and the illegal concreting over to provide a base for caravans appears to be nothing more than a business plan and process by families who have no immediate need or direct need themselves for additional units. Planning applications only follow when the council realise that such illegal activity is occurring. This continual unauthorised construction of such sites, followed by appeals when the planning application is refused, demonstrates a complete lack of respect for the wider community, for the environment and for the planning process. It should also be noted that intentional unauthorised development has continued in the same field as the 4 appeal sites, with a mobile home being situated in another new area of hard standing. So, on behalf of Bramley Parish Council, I respectfully request that the inspector dismisses all the appeals at this inquiry. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Stone. Can I just check that in terms of statements, is it just this statement from yourself on behalf of Bramley? There's nothing else?
No, apart from the pictures, the evidence.
There were the documents that came in,
Yeah.
yes, which I've got. Okay, good. Just need to note that. And just to give us some context, I know that there is a plan showing the parish boundaries, which may be helpful to the parties, given what Councillor Stearns said, which I got with an email of the 28th of October 2024, which was actually sent in by Alfold Parish Council on behalf of all the parishes, and that shows where Bramley has come, Alfold and Dunscombe. Okay. We may come to some of the, in the discussion, Councillor, so we may well come on to some of the points that you've raised there, and please, please contribute on those as you wish. But you've set the scene from Bramley.
I just wonder, sir, if I ask via you.
Yes.
Regarding the 2024 count by WBC, that there were 198 static caravans on sites at Stovolds Hill area.
Let me just see where.
It's just above the table, table 2.
Got it, yeah.
Because of course we have the caravan count figures that show 116 caravans that are not tolerated by Waverley, but we don't know where they are. And I just wondered if there's a document that that figure was derived from, whether or not it would be available for us to look at it.
Councillor Stern, can you assist where you got that from? It's on page 2 of your statement.
So there is a reference my figures about the details and January 2024,
So you think that's what you used to get those figures?
Yeah, and probably information from Waverley's website as well about the actual number of
We understand that Waverley report to the department with the
Yes.
count that they've carried out.
Yes.
So of course the figure does exist. It's just interesting that the councillor is able to quote that particular number when it's not apparent on the caravan count figure. So there must be some information that Waverley has got on this that was supplied to Councillor Stern.
Well, that's not what Councillor Stern said. That she said that she got things herself from the website rather than having contact.
I got information from the website, but I've also seen information on Waverley's website.
Yes.
And of course, I've had access to all documentation. But I did this particular table, I did in November.
I think what Mr. Cottle's wondering is whether you've simply gone to publicly accessible sources or whether you've got the information in any other way.
Or do you get the information in
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Councillor. I think, as I understand it, Mr. Cottle, Councillor Stern is just a member of the parish councillor, not a district councillor. So that's right, is it? You're not on both councils. Yeah. Yeah. Right, as I said before lunch, just wanted to check the positions on need as far as the main parties were concerned. And I want to go, I think in each case, I'm going to come to Mr. Jarman first, and then we'll see what the other parties have to say. And if we can start with the local plan period, Mr. Jarman. So which runs up to 2032.
Can I just clarify something? We're not talking in response to the councillor's statement now.
No,
We're going on to the next item.
I gave Councillor Stern the opportunity to speak first because
Right.
she gave me the impression that what she wanted to say ranged across a number of points that we're going to be touching on.
So I wasn't sure if you wanted me to
No,
respond
I
to
don't.
some of those points.
There's no need, unless of course there's something particularly pressing that you want to mention. But what I want to look at specifically, first of all, is the local planning authority's position in terms of need for gypsy and traveller accommodation to the end of the local plan period, which I think is from what you've, it's 31st of March 32.
Yes.
So period of close on 7 years.
Yeah, if it's quite nicely summarised in figure 1 and figure 2 of the GTAA report on page 8.
Right, let me just get
And
that up.
figure 1 sets out the total need by the then planning definition categories. And for the period 2017 to 2032, obviously those individual figures are then broken down in other places throughout the document, but that's the best summary that you can put your hands on quickly. So that total 61 pitches across all travellers to 2032. And I understand that there has also been an adjustment since the GTAA to take account of 2 additional pitches as a result of an appeal that Mr. Lintott and I were involved in Waverley at a site called Pollingford Place.
So figure 1 of the GTA gives us the 61, doesn't it?
61, and then there was an adjustment made during the Pollingford Place inquiry to uplift that to 63 in total.
Yes, and I think you deal with that, don't you, in paragraph 89?
I think I do. I've got
I'm
so many.
pretty sure you, I'm pretty
I've got
sure
so
you-
many proofs in front of me that
Yeah, this is I think I saw that.
Paragraph 86, actually.
Is it my reference? Sorry.
yes, 86.
Paragraph 86, that's right.
Oh, it's 89. It's in both, so I was right.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's okay. No, you're quite right. I stand corrected. It's
So-
the tables. Yeah.
Yeah, but that prompted another query, I think, because dealing with the documents in chronological order that you've put in, Mr. Jarman, I'd spotted that you'd uplifted it to 63, but then you've got your supplementary evidence, which is your most recent document of May. And in paragraph 12 and paragraph 14, you go back to 61.
Yes, those would just be errors, sir. And the figures were quite fluid through the preparation of the proofs from the bottom of the supplementary proofs. And
So what are you settling on? Should I take the latest figure or the 63?
we're taking the latest figure,
Well,
63, but that is my table under paragraph 80 or so. That's my table under paragraph 89, which concluded 64. But following discussions with the council, the second entry on that table, WA 2015-0189, land at Bridgeview for 1 pitch, that actually preceded the GTAA period, so was already included. So we've taken that out to give the total supply in relation to that table of 63. But subsequently, on the 28th of April this year, there were a further 2 pitches permitted on a site in Stovolds Hill. So that figure in first half of paragraph 89 should now be 65.
hang on, let me. First half of paragraph.
My conclusion under subtotal halfway down page 24
Sorry,
in my
sorry, I'm on the wrong page. Page 24. Yeah.
that adjusted figure now excluding the land at Bridgeview and including the 2 additional pitches at Stovolds Hill, the total subtotal there should now be 65 as of the inquiry.
Oh, sorry, in the table itself.
Yes.
So. Right, so
So
just let me make a note for the reason for that. So you start off with 64.
Start off at 64.
Yeah.
We've then concluded that the second reference on page 23 ending 0189 should be excluded because the decision date was before the baseline of the GTAA and the site was included in the GTAA. So we've taken that off to go down to 63. And then we've added in the new application from April of this year for 2 pitches to get to 65.
Right.
Are we there? Are we on the same page now?
We are, but I'm not sure whether we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah, well, Mr. Jarman has gone into your
Supply.
issue 4, hasn't he, supply, whereas what you were asking for was
Need,
confirmation of issue 3, which is local plan level of need.
yeah.
So that I
Yeah.
could see
Oh,
that's why
yeah.
you were raising an eyebrow, so to speak, but I thought, well, probably better just to let him carry on and clarify the figure if you wanted to.
Yes, the need for the full plan period for all travellers is 63.
Right, so that's the adjusted figure that was agreed at the previous inquiry.
Yes, which just happened to add up to the total supply in my original table when adjusted, but that's just not.
Right, so
And Inspector, you said that you thought that the figure of 61 had been carried in
to the supplementary,
into so because the rebuttal, where it's dealt
the
with in
rebuttal gives the
it's
63,
63,
but then the later
yeah,
document,
but the supplemental says 61. Well, that must just be, as Mr. Jarman says, that's just an error, I think.
is that the position?
The position is 63.
The position is 63, adjusted as the rebuttal.
Yeah.
I took the report figure initially, and even though I was involved in the appeal, I just forgot to add those to it.
Okay, and that's for the whole plan period.
Yes, it is.
Have you calculated what the residual need is? Which presumably you'd need to do to get the 5-year figure.
What I have actually calculated this morning is the total need up to the end of the current 5-year. Yeah, I am on. Yeah, the total need up to the end of the current 5-year period, which is to 2029, 2030.
Yes.
So the total need target to the end of the current 5-year period is for 55 pitches. And what I've done to arrive at that figure is I've taken all of the 0 to 5 need, 0 to 5 year need, all of the year 6 to 10 need, and then a proportion of the year 11 to 13 need. So that brings me to a conclusion that the 5-year target is for 55 pitches. I have taken the year 11 to 15 and I've just done some maths on it, yes.
But that's not an up-to-date figure. That's based on 2017.
That's based on the 2017 assessment figures, yes. I don't have any up-to-date figures.
So it ignores the need arising from the permissions granted since 2017.
It is apportioning the need in the GTAA up to the end of the current 5-year period.
So we taking all the new period of time, so we've got.
Yes. As the starting point. So let's work on the assumption no permissions have been granted up to today. There would be a need for 55 pitches to fulfill the current 5-year requirements to 2029-30. Based on the 2017 GTAA outcomes.
I'm trying to get to the incentive.
Yes.
You all that's all, and then you still need 3 more years.
Yes.
Do you do that on a pro rata basis?
So I've done that on a pro rata basis for if you just take figure 2 in the GTAA, which is 4 pitches, years 11 to 15, I've assumed 2 of them. And I've done the same to just break that figure down for the respective tables in Appendix B and Appendix C. Coming on to that item of the agenda, yes, that would be the current supply target based on the local plan level of need. I haven't done anything to the baseline. I've taken the baseline as on the 2017 GTAA. So essentially, the full plan need to 2032 is 63, and to 2029, 30 is for 55.
Although you've gone 5 years, it's in fact 2017.
Yes, as I said, it's on the assumption to start with that there has been no supply. So if you bring the residual need of 37 from year 0 to 5, if you bring the residual need of 7 from year 6 to 10, and then add the year 11 to 13 to get the 5-year period, you get the 55.
That evidence is fine if we're sitting here in March 2017 or the publication date of the GTA. But if you look at all the columns of need in terms of waiting list, unauthorized encampments, planning permissions, concealed households, and you ask, what is the need based on those columns? You haven't got the figure because the GTA hasn't been done yet. And so when you say that the satisfactory situation in Waverley, you are denying the fact that there's a known gap in your figures.
Paragraph 10 of the PPTS requires local authorities to demonstrate a 5-year supply of pitches against their locally identified targets. The locally identified target in Waverley currently is the 2017 GTA8, because it has not been superseded by anything. So that is the local evidence base the council are working towards under the requirements of the PPTS.
Paragraph 10A of the PPTS says you should identify and update annually supply deliverables from it sufficient to meet five years worth of sites.
But the point I was going to make is that what you're looking at the 5-year supply as of now. That covers this period for the next 5 years, which is not the figure given by Mr. Jarman, who seems to want to take the third period, and then only take the period so far. But it's not the current unmet need which you're required to look at, and so it's a fiction. It doesn't matter how you look at it; it's a fiction. Once you come to the realization that you can't rely upon anymore on the 2017 GTA because it's out of date, what you have to ask yourself a question is, well, what is the evidence of current need? And I wonder, sir, if I could draw your attention to table 3 of Mr. Ward's evidence, page 62. Because it sort of it's page 62. It mirrors the evidence from the parish council about the numbers for Lydia Park. There's a table 3 is a table summarising the number of static caravans on the land at Lydia Park on the 28th of August 24. So not quite a year ago, but the date 10 months ago. But that's the best. What's interesting to note, sir, is that Mr. Ward uses this to reflect on how caravan counts as planning permissions have been given, and tries to make a point about occupation by gypsies and non-gypsies, which I'm going to ignore for the moment. But the interesting thing, sir, if you look at pitch approvals, which is the second column, okay, and then you look at the number of caravans that are actually there, which is 22, you'll immediately realise actually that what this analysis shows is the number of additional unauthorised caravans that are on those sites that are unlawful. and this is a better indication of need than any figure. So for instance, if you take the 22 for WA 2020-051, that's supposed to be 7 pitches. Well, let's assume that that's 14 static caravans. That means there's an excess of 8. You then go to,
What are your figures, Mr. Masters?
Yep.
You're on the second row, are you?
yes,
So 7 pitches approved.
yeah.
Where do you get 14 from?
I'm working on the basis that 1 pitch is a mobile and a tourer.
Yes,
Okay, I know it says static caravans.
exactly. You can't assume 14 statics.
No,
can you?
in which case, so the number would be, 15.
15. But
And then if you go to the next site down, where you have no planning permission, then we've got 9. So if you then go to the next
Yeah.
site, which is 5,
yeah, there are similar points as you go down the
Yeah.
table, yes.
and so you've got in excess of over 100 unauthorized people living on sites that are only permitted for a much lesser number, and that's only in the area of Lydia Park. And so just to make the other point, to suggest, nowhere does this table suggest that they're non-travellers, except for the 18 in WA 2020,
So
where it says
which-
18, some vacant, others rented out. In relation to the other columns, it's all 0.
Which one are you looking at then?
I'm looking again at the second
Oh,
one.
yes, sorry. It's penultimate
Second-
one.
Yeah. We don't accept that, sir, because of course, this table was made before the change in definition. And the change in definition includes anybody that has a history of living in caravans. Don't have to be a gypsy and traveller. The definition covers gypsy and travellers who are at the moment in bricks and mortar, who don't want to be there, and people like New Age travellers and other people who have a history of living in caravans. And so there's really scant evidence of these people not meeting the definition. But what it does show on the council's own evidence is a huge need, far in excess of the 55 need that, and this is just in the area of Lydia Park, because of course we don't have the similar figures for other areas.
Inspector, if it's convenient, I'd have Mr Ward come back on that, but just in respect to one point of the interpretation of policy, which was made by, I think, Mr Cottle earlier on. Just to remind you that in terms of what local planning authorities should do in the PPTS, they identify and update annually a supply of specific deliverable sites, sufficient to provide 5 years worth of sites against their locally set targets. That the target doesn't change. Target is that set out in the GTAA. The supply needs to be updated as you get sites being permitted to meet that target, but you don't change the target in the way that's been suggested. That would be wholly wrong. And in respect to Mr Masters' point about what the table that Chris Ward shows in terms of whether or not that shows a much greater need, I would just ask Mr Ward to speak to what his own table demonstrates.
The implication, I think, from listening to Mr Masters is suggesting that in that first entry, for instance, that there are 22 static caravans that are occupied on the site. If you move forward 2 columns, you'll see that there are 18 which I've identified as not occupied by gypsies or travellers, some of which are vacant and others of which are being rented out. Now, in Appendix CW 16, you've got a series of photos we may go to later, which shows how these caravans are laid out on site. But the numerical count there simply records the number of static caravans which are on the site. Now, from information given to me by the council, a large number of those static caravans are vacant and no one is occupying them at the moment. A number of them, again identified in CW 16A, are actually being offered for rent, and some of them are actually being rented out. And to the best of the information the council has provided, I've included in CW 16A, where the council knows if any of the people who are renting or using those homes are actually gypsies and travellers or otherwise.
I'll come
But
back.
22 is simply a figure of a static caravan on the site. It is not the figure of the number of caravans which are being occupied by anybody on the site. So to suggest that there are 22 unauthorised caravans there, yes, they are unauthorised in the context they are not being laid out and occupied as gypsy pitches.
So I'm going to come back to that.
Yes, Mr.
Mr.
Masters.
Clark's giving new evidence. His table doesn't differentiate between occupied and non-occupied, except for WA 2020-0551, which uses the reference vacant. He doesn't use that reference anywhere else. So he's giving new evidence for which there is no evidence before us as to the situation. But the points that are important here is that the council have approved all these pitches. Most of these pitches were not appeals, but were approved by the council, presumably because they wanted to be able to demonstrate that they were giving towards their 5-year supply. So they approved these on the adjacent sites. Secondly, there's no evidence of any before you at all of any enforcement action or any other action in relation to the breaches at all. And I hear what Mr. Ward is now saying. In discussions with council, he's determined this. Well, there's no evidence of that, sir, and we would challenge that. And the position at the moment is that a stark one, which is that of the new approvals encouraged by the council, we have a massive overcrowding.
Well, Inspector, you will have in front of you the supplementary evidence which demonstrates the enforcement action that the council is taking in respect of those.
Very,
breaches.
very recent evidence of, but there's no evidence of actual enforcement action, sir.
Breach of condition.
Breach of condition, but no evidence of actual enforcement action, the evictions, injunctions.
Right, Mr. Masters, I want to bring you back to what we were talking about initially with Mr. Jarman.
Yes. Sorry.
You were asking Mr. Jarman about the residual need.
Yes.
And the way I saw Mr. Jarman answering it was by reference to the 2017 figures that was backed up by my own friend Mr. Lintott on his construction of the PPTS. But there's two things going on here. There's AHN4 says sites to meet the identified need will be allocated within part 2 of the local plan. So the 2018 plan didn't make any allocations.
Yes.
And then in 2023, March 23, the council adopted an allocation for 15 pitches that we then knew was out of date because, of course, it was relying on a supply of pitches which occupied by people who hadn't been interviewed. And so the difference really is in your task for the purposes of these appeals, as my own friend Mr. Masters pointed out under paragraph 24, of deciding what the current level of need is, irrespective of what happened in the past. And my point to Mr. Jarman is, does he accept that if the new permissions were interviewed, there would be emerging households? And those are permissions that were granted since 2017. And Mr. Jarman answered it previously by saying, well, the GTA has been approved twice by different planning inspectors. And in fact, he referred to the Burnt Hill decision where matters were actually agreed between the parties. There wasn't an argument over it. But my point is, does he accept that need has evolved now and that there will be emerging households from those permissions granted since 2017?
Well, go on, Mr. Jarman. And You have already addressed the point, but you,
I have addressed the point and I'll reiterate it as I have in my statement and as Mr. Ward has as well. It's likely that additional permissions may generate need, but it's been undetermined because the needs assessment has not been completed yet. And I don't see the purpose of this inquiry today being to try to do a new GTAA on the hoof without evidence. But what I can say is that, and it is on your agenda, that the evidence before me from the council is that the vast proportion of the permissions, and in particular around Weeping Willow, Stovolds Hill, Yellowstone, etc., are not occupied by travellers and therefore will not generate any need moving forward.
right.
So the
I don't want to get sidetracked into Lincoln
No.
Park at the moment. I put that down as a specific item, and so I don't want to go there. What I do want to do, I'll come back to Mr. Cottle before I come to you, Mr. Masters, is I've noticed the points you've made about the way that the council has answered the question about need. What is the, is the appellant's position, Mr. Cottle, as far as you're concerned, simply to say that the figures that the council has put forward today in this inquiry, the 55 for a gross 5-year need and the 63 for a local plan need, is it your position that that's simply it must be an underestimate because because of the date of the GTAA is being updated, or do you have anything to suggest where of the magnitude that you think it should be? Being any more specific than criticising it?
Well, Mr. Woods referred to Appendix 7, which was a decision letter of an inspector or paragraph 37.
Right, sorry, whose appendix is this?
This is Appendix 7.
Mr. Woods?
Yeah, Mr. Woods.
Right, let me just find that.
It's in his appendices. I'll just check.
7. 7.
Appendix 7 for Mr. Woods.
Yes, sir.
Right, I wonder what's happening.
And there's
Sorry, it's appendix 6 actually, sorry.
So I've got Mr. Tom.
D. And it's a paragraph
Yeah.
37.
Paragraph.
And
Yeah, got it.
what the inspector was basically dealing with was a GTA that was there a bit long in the tooth, even though there'd been subsequent decisions by the councils on what the target need was.
Yes.
But she concluded that I consider there's sufficient uncertainty to cast doubt over whether the council has got a 5-year supply of deliverable sites. And that's what Mr. Masters was saying as of now, looking at the situation as of now, which you're required to do under paragraph 24. And that's the way I opened the case to you, sir, on behalf of Mr. Simon Doherty. That's inescapable that given the need to reassess accommodation requirements, that the council cannot demonstrate an up-to-date 5-year supply because of this long overdue GTAA.
So can I
And
just,
that particular site, sir, interesting to note, it's an allocation in the local plan part 2 for 2 pitches. It was originally proposed for allocation for 3, but during the iterations of the plan, it dropped to 2. And of course, that appeal, Appendix 6, relates to 4 pitches. And what was granted was a personal permission. So it's a Gypsy and Travellers, but it was personal name for those occupants. So that can't go towards the council's meeting their need because it's personal.
so if I could just summarise my position, which is that I say you can't rely on the 2017 GTA. It's too far out of date, and we've indicated to you the various
Yes.
problems with it.
So is your
which-
position the same, Mr. Masters? It's a criticism of the council's position rather than a suggestion of an alternative figure?
The case law, it's Swale, it's one of mine, says you shouldn't, I'm not asking you, and we couldn't ask you to indicate an alternative figure. We're not doing that. You can indicate whether or not you think there's a significant unmet need, whatever.
And is that what you're doing?
That's the approach we're suggesting you take. And there's evidence that we tried to demonstrate, for instance, just by the table 3 of Mr. Ward, that indicate the overcrowding on these sites and the additional number of caravans, which we say are indicative of that need. I mean, we're talking about over 100 just in these.
Yes, I said I don't want to go there. at the
No, I
moment.
know. I'm not going to go back over there, but
We'll move on to what you,
so
other points.
so what we're saying, sir, is that and we're not asking you to say, well, what is the figure 55? What it is? The difficulty is that you don't know, and I do take this point, which is really crucial, is the council have a duty to update their figures annually, but we know that they have spurned that duty. So there's a real failure of policy here, which makes your life even fundamentally more difficult. Because what the council are really saying, well, we're not helping you. We've decided to pause the whole process that we started a year ago. So you don't have the up-to-date figures. So we want you to go back to the 2017 figures because that's the only ones you've got. We're saying that that's a very unfair position now with such undated procedures. So the council are not assisting you, therefore, as to what the true level of need is. And we couldn't tell you precisely what it is in any way, but we can indicate from the biannual counts, the evidence from the parish council, the evidence from the council's own table in relation to Lydia Park, that the need is extensive. And therefore there's no 5-year supply to meet that need.
So, Inspector, could
Yes,
I just
Mr.
come
Linton.
back, because this is a decision that you've been taken to for the first time. And I think it's important that you are aware of the context of it. So I'm talking about the Tongan Road decision.
yes,
And
Appendix 6.
I think it's important that my learned friends are clear as to what they're suggesting. In that case, it was found by the inspector at paragraph 35, the council can demonstrate a 5-year supply of sites. That was her conclusion on the 5-year supply issue. Now, the ultimate decision that she came to grant a personal permission related to the personal circumstances that she went on to consider from the bottom of paragraph 35, where she said that there are no vacancies for these families to move on to, and she then went through those families' circumstances. Clearly, there are a number of considerations that you need to come to, and you've separated off a number of considerations within your little agenda for today. It seems to me, but I'm not giving evidence, that it's obvious the council has got a 5-year supply of sites. What people are really saying is that there are other considerations that need to be given weight in the balance, and there's an argument about whether or not there is a available site for these occupants to move on to, and that relates to what the situation is at Lydia. But that's something that you need to ascertain for yourself, whether or not on the figures there is a 5-year supply of sites. But the target you take to come to that decision, as this inspector did, is that in the adopted target, which is that in the GTAA, and the updated supply, which is what's talked about in paragraph 10 of the PPTS. In terms of whether or not there are available sites, whether these sites are being occupied at Lydia Park by people who aren't gypsies and can be moved off, what enforcement action has been taken, well, that all goes towards whether or not that other consideration is met, whether or not there are available alternatives for these families to go to, which is a different consideration. And you've separated that out as your 5. But that's certainly the way that this inspector dealt with it. And I would ask you to keep that context in mind when you're looking at the issues that you're determining on this appeal.
So I think the point
Okay,
has been missed, which is important. The burden here on 5-year supply rests with the council. They've got to demonstrate to you, so you're satisfied that there is a 5-year supply. The only way they've done it so far is to rely on 2017 figures. And
Well,
I,
everybody's agreed on the 2017, and that's what's been used.
That's point. And the columns of need that were identified in the 2017 GTA, and Mr. Jarman says, well, tell me, because I've been doing this for 14 years, if there's another head or a column, all of those columns will have changed since 2017 because need will have evolved in each of them. And we know from the recent GTA decision figures, for example, that there are 116 caravans on not tolerated caravans.
So where are you now?
This is a GTA figure from July 2024. And the point is that unauthorized caravans are very poor proxy for need. Mr. Jarman has explained it a number of times, but it does indicate that there are people to be interviewed, to talk to find out whether they're
Sorry,
inward.
the figure that is it in a document I've got?
It's in the caravan,
Can I
councillor.
hand it up?
Yes.
Yeah, have I got it?
No, I'm not sure you have, sir. Not the latest one. I think you have something in our
Sorry,
evidence earlier.
would you like to receive it?
And the point was, in Inspector Orr's decision, in the paragraph that you've been pointed to about the need, the following paragraph talks about the biannual count, and then whilst it's only a snapshot in time, it seems to be an upward trend. Unauthorised pitches 10 to
This is paragraph
18 during this
36.
period. Yeah, paragraph 36, sir. 10 to 18 during this period. And now we're over 100.
But as you said, Mr. Woods, it's a snapshot in time. It's just taken on 2 days a year, isn't it?
Yes, that's right, sir. But the point is, she said, well, you know, yes, it's upward trend, slight amount. But when you 10 to 18 and then it's over 100, it's an awful lot more, isn't it?
Well,
Although it's
well,
only a snapshot in time, of course.
have you got one for?
so which is why, if I can just say.
Well, hang on, let me just look at what I've
Sorry.
been given before you go on to something else, Mr. Masters.
No, I wasn't going on something else, but anyway, I'll wait, sir.
Stephen, is this the one that's referred to at 8.26 of Mr. Wood's evidence? Right.
Weren't available at that time, so it's not.
So if you've put this in, Mr. Cottle, the figure, just find the figure for me that you were referring to. Yeah, where it says Waverley, yeah.
And it's a figure of 116, which shows it quite as against previous figures. And it echoes what Councillor Stern said, which is about the total number of caravans that have gone up.
Yes, I can see the figure.
And so just a point that we're saying that art demonstrates an up-to-date supply potential.
And that simply shows a trend from, as you put it, from, it's just 2 years, isn't it?
No, that in 2017, there were 178. You look right down at the bottom. January 2017, right in the right-hand column, total caravans 278. And the number of caravans has gone up. People in those additional caravans haven't been into. How do you know that? Because they weren't there when we did the base test.
Point that's important not to distract you is how safe would it be for you to rely upon the figure of 55? And we say that based on current evidence, that isn't a reliable figure. And therefore, the increase in numbers from the caravan count, the evidence of Councillor Stern, and the evidence, the council's own evidence of the number of additional static caravans on Lydia Park in table 3, which are not based on a biannual snapshot, but on a date in 2018 that we're supposed to indicate from Councillor Stern that they're there, but that number, because action's being taken against them, so we're saying, but it's only breach of condition action, is a more reliable indication of need for which there is no supply.
Well, I think we'll have to wait and see what people say about. Well, I want to hear more about Lydia Park first, because given the numbers that have been referred to there, I don't know whether the 116 refers in large part to Lydia Park, and there may well be questions in relation to that. The 116, it doesn't say the caravans occupied by travellers, it's on land owned by travellers. And depending on what's being said about Lydia Park, there may possibly be a difference there.
Well, they might be reconcilable and there might be a simple explanation. The people
Yes.
that the parish council were talking to down the pub might have been policemen and doctors and not travellers. We don't know.
Can I just respond very quickly to that point?
Yes, Mr. Jarman.
If you look at the traveller count, caravan count data, you can see a very static pattern going from the January to the July figure. And if you go back many, many years below, that figure seems to be repeated in that you've got people that are moving onto sites in the winter, relatively similar numbers, moving off in the summer, moving off back in the winter, moving off in the summer. You then, between January 2024 and July 2024, have a sudden influx of caravans. Now, having spoken with the council officers that did the caravan count, their view is that the vast majority of these are the unauthorised caravans on land owned by travellers at Lydia Park, or the newer area of Lydia Park, not the traditional part to the southeast. So whilst it's not reported, whilst it's not published on a site-by-site basis, the matrix that the council have to update online with the caravan count, because we do caravan counts for councils across the country, you do have to record them on a site-by-site basis, but they're just amalgamated in terms of the reporting. So discussions with the council, and I'm sure the evidence will be there if required, should indicate that that sudden peak between January and July 2024 is in the vast majority due to additional vans being brought onto sites at Lydia Park.
So I don't recall in the additional evidence made by Mr. Jarman that that's a remark he's made before in that written evidence. I think it's something he said for the first time today in response to the evidence as it's growing. So I think you should be very cautious about that position.
I don't think the document that's just been put in on behalf of the appellants is something I've seen before today.
Yeah, no, not mine. I've been relying on table 3, which is one of your
No,
documents.
you're being critical of new evidence being given.
No, sir.
New evidence has been given by
Well,
other parties.
What I'm saying, so the council's own table 3 illustrates at Lydia Park an extensive overcrowding and breach of condition situation.
Well,
it's pretty. It's.
I hear that's what you say about it. That's your interpretation
Yeah.
of table 3, Mr.
That
Masters.
is what we know about table 3. These are the newer sites promoted by the council.
Yeah, but I don't want to go to Lydia Park just yet.
No, okay.
I've said that several times, and I want you to stay clear of it. I've heard your views.
Yeah, okay, so.
I've heard the views of the appellants on need and the view of the local planning authority. I just want to go to supply in terms of what's available to meet that need. And again, Mr. Jarman, I'm coming to you first. And I want to be clear about figures because I think I've picked up 3, and I just want to understand them. Let me tell you what I've got. I think I started off in your proof think I've made a note about paragraph 85 of your proof, which, or is it 85? It might. I had a note somewhere that there were. Yes, you've got the table below paragraph 85. That's 78, which you may, in view of what you said earlier, you may well be adjusting. In your rebuttal at paragraph 24, you had 67. And then in your supplementary at paragraph 14, you're on to 77. So I just want to understand, first of all, what the council's position to me at this inquiry is in terms of supply. Yeah.
To get a definitive picture, and I think the easiest way to talk you through it would be to refer back to the table under paragraph 89 in my first proof.
Yeah, this is where we were before. And
This is where we were
You
before.
were talking
when
about
I-
supplying to
yeah.
the need.
It
Yeah.
just, sod's law, that the numbers all added up, even though we were talking about two different things. Right, so.
So you started off on page 23 and took the second site out, I think,
Took the site out
because you
ending-
said it was pre-GTAA.
Yes. So that then takes the total halfway down page 24 to 63.
That took it to 63.
Then we've had two new permissions, or permissions for two new pitches, reference ending 00451.
00. See,
00451. And
where were they at?
they were granted in April this year on another site at Stovolds Hill.
Oh, so that was Stovolds Hill again.
Yes, so that takes the subtotal figure in the middle of page 24 to 65.
Oh, so that's where, yeah.
So that's the definitive supply figure from the council's perspective.
But then you had the 14, but
Hmm?
you had the 14 below
Yeah.
it, don't you, Mr. John?
And then on top of that, there are the allocations, the outstanding allocations in the local plan for 14.
So that would give you 79, is that
That
right?
gives a total for 79. And in addition to that, I think I have mentioned at Kilnside Place, there is a resolution to grant subject to a section 106.
For how many?
That's 3, but that's already an allocation. So
Oh, that's covered.
that's covered under the allocations, yes.
Right.
But again, that was to demonstrate that the allocations aren't just pie in the sky.
Right, which allocation is this? Is it
It's allocation DS 18.
Killenhall, right?
So that is demonstrating from a policy point of view that these allocations are coming through the planning process.
Right, so, but in terms of availability,
Hmm?
you're saying 79
Yes,
set against the figure that you told me earlier for need for the 5 years.
for 55.
Yeah. And in terms of the need for a 5-year supply, are any of those 79 constrained in terms of coming forward within the 5-year period? Thinking particularly of the local plan allocations.
From my perspective, no.
There is a formidable question raised by Mr. Wood, CW 16A, regarding the layout of the permissions on some of the sites, because it looks to me very much as if the permissions weren't implemented.
Do we,
That's just not right, is it? Because there's no pre-commencement
but do we,
conditions.
do we need to go to this document 16A?
Yeah.
That's appendix 16A, is it, Mr. Ward?
Yeah, so that it's 16A in the new evidence of Mr. Ward. That's right, the latest version.
Right, I'll have to get that up electronically.
It's got a fiendishly complicated annotation. That's this one, the supplemental
Right, I'll
proof.
do,
It's
let me
with
see.
with a little Roman numeral as well.
looks like I'll have to try another route. R16A, yeah.
Yeah, so it's
No,
all in.
I'm in
it's all
16A.
It's all in CD 10A, and then 1 supplementary
Right.
evidence.
Are you an electronic version, Mr.
Well,
Linton?
I've got it printed out, but to help you, I'm going to look
Give me-
at it in the electronic version as well. So
Give
that
me a page number for the PDF.
just scrolling down. So it's all right. So within so the reference is CD 10A 1.3, which is a supplemental planning evidence.
Yeah,
And then what you need from that is the appendix, which has got 16A.
I've got that.
Right.
I've got that as a separate document somehow,
All right. Okay.
which probably isn't going to help.
So just wondering whether I've got
What
those.
I'm looking at is a plan of showing sites of different colours.
Yeah, so that's page 1 of 22 at the bottom right-hand corner is
1 of 22, yes.
so you got it. Yeah.
Right, so am I in the right place?
Yes, you are.
Right. And then you wanted to say something about that, I think, Mr. Linton.
Well, I mean, what I was saying is that, you know, it really was in response to what Mr. Cottle was saying about these sites not being implemented. And I, as you'll recall, that the test in footnote 4, where you've got planning permission, is that essentially those are deliverable unless there's evidence that they won't be implemented within a 5-year period. And there's simply no evidence that any of these sites haven't been implemented, in the sense that, you know, they've not had development begin on them. The criticism made in respect of 16A is in relation to who's on them, how they've been laid out, but certainly it's not suggested they've not been implemented.
Well, I think the point is that that's what we are saying, because the conditions haven't been discharged, so you haven't got a permission.
So
Conditions haven't been
Yes.
discharged because they've not been submitted, so
right.
therefore the permission falls.
Well, only if it's a pre-commencement.
Can I just give you an example, sir? I've got Appendix CW 16A, Update on Activities Accommodation at Lydia Park, and it's on page 13 of a PDF of 80. And it's got an extract location plan for WA 2020-1866.
That's your on page, internal page 13.
Yeah, that's right.
Let me find them.
And it says it's a site referred to as Yellowstone Park.
Okay, let me just find
And the
13.
number of static caravans
Hold on.
was 30.
Let me just find
The
page
inspector's trying to
13.
find he's just going to it now.
Right, internal page 13.
It refers to WA 2020-1866.
Got a photograph at the top. Is that right?
It says Yellowstone Park.
Mine says update on activities and accommodation at Lydia Park, April 2025. It's got an aerial photograph and then a photograph of an end on static.
Okay, well,
That's page
Ma-
13.
this is internal page 6 of 22. And
Oh,
the
6.
electronic number is 13 on mine.
Oh, right. Let me try page 6 because I've got it as a separate
6 of
document.
22.
I think it's page 5 of the actual document. 1866.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's right, Inspector. It's page 5 of 22, the bottom of that page, 2020-1866.
Right, page 5, there's a photograph, and below that, caravans advertised for rent. That's
And at the bottom of page 5, it's got a heading in bold, WA 20-1866.
yes, I've got
And
that.
then
now.
below that, it's got a diagram, an extract of the location plan. And then below that, it says the actual number of static caravans on the site was 33. And my point is that
Yes,
if the pictures show, as we got from the local residents, a planning permission granted in 2021, it would have lapsed if it was never implemented and instead has 33 caravans on it.
That is if it wasn't implemented. But you've got no evidence that it wasn't implemented.
Well, the photographs show what's going on.
Well, they show more caravans than there should be, but they don't
It's
show
not
that the
laid out
permission
in
wasn't
pictures at
implemented.
all.
He's saying it's never been laid out in accordance with the planning permission.
Well, the
Have you got
photographic
evidence?
evidence that we have doesn't show it.
Well, have you got evidence? You're making, the appellant's
Huge
making an accusation that it's not been implemented.
It-
What
it-
evidence
it's-
have you got to
I'm raising a
substantiate that?
question mark.
And what evidence is there to support the question?
The evidence to support the question is that the number of permissions on Lydia Park exceed the needs of travellers because of all these caravans that are there. And if you're relying on 33 caravans there, that suggests to me that the planning permission wasn't implemented.
But the planning commission, isn't it? Wasn't they given a date of several years before that?
It was 2021, that's right.
Yes. So,
And so the fact is that the site has been rolled out as something completely different to what was applied for.
well, that's the position now against 2021.
Well, we
isn't
know
it?
from the aerial photographs it was empty. We've got them in the injunction papers showing that piece of land was empty until quite recently. And then what's rolled out there isn't 9 pitches, it's caravans in a row. And we've got quite a lot of photographs.
Yes, which you get.
Well,
Again,
it's better. I mean, if I could come back on that. I mean, footnote 4 says planning permission should be considered deliverable until permission expires unless there is clear evidence that schemes will not be implemented within 5 years. This doesn't come anywhere near clear evidence that schemes won't be implemented within 5 years. We're looking at a situation now where the local authority is saying it has been implemented and it's now being occupied in breach of condition. This isn't a case which is suggested. The basis upon which it's put in Mr. Woods' evidence is that there may be pre-commencement conditions or pre-occupation conditions that have been breached. And I would agree that if there was evidence that there was a pre-commencement condition that had not been complied with, then you would be getting close to clear evidence that the schemes would not have been implemented perhaps within 5 years. But we're not there on this case. This is just a case with planning permission that the evidence suggests it's in breach of condition. And indeed, the council is relying upon those breaches of condition in order to take action to clear the sites.
It would just be a question of looking back at the photographs, sir, and I agree with you that the evidence for it is only what the local authority is saying, the councillors are saying, but it's also backed up by the photographs. And I'll stand to be corrected when there's got so many photographs in 2021 onwards regarding that pitch being laid out according to the planning permission.
So it seems to me what you're looking at in relation to these areas of Lydia Park is whether there's a realistic supply, and you can't ignore the reality of Table 3, which I've come back to a number of times now about the numbers there in excess. It's a very glib comment made by my learned friend to say, oh, well, we're taking action against them. But one at the moment that the action is only by magistrates court breach of condition. It's not even enforcement action. But if enforcement action at some point in time is taken, then each of the occupiers on that land will have a right of appeal. Their needs will have to be assessed. And even if they're found to be in breach of condition, it doesn't mean that they have a genuine need for accommodation. And that's simply, the evidence seems to point towards a need rather than a supply.
yeah, you've already made that point, Mr. Masters, in respect of Lydia Park, and we're going to return to it. What I'm trying to do is to get an understanding from the appellants of their view of supply.
Well, the point that I'm making, sir, is it's very difficult to be counting any of those sites towards supply based on, oh, well, the people who were there are in breach of conditions and therefore.
No, I'm not talking about the Japan.
No,
I'm talking about your view of supply
Uh,
in the borough.
well, so that,
I've got a figure. I've heard your respective positions in terms of need. I've got a figure from Mr. Jarman, which relates, he's amended his, the figure at the table in his original proof. And we've ended up with a figure of 79 that the council are putting forward at this inquiry. Now, I know you disagree in terms of need and the weight to be given to the GTA. I know you've got criticism of that. What about supply?
well, so the 79 is, can be looked at in two ways. If it's a figure of the current count of gypsy sites being 79, that's one thing. But if it's a figure of vacant and available sites to meet need, then we say there is no evidence of that. Clearly, it's about these sites are being occupied by individuals. In fact, over-occupied by individuals.
We're not talking about what's happening on Lidger Park.
Mm.
I'm looking at, and what Mr. Jarman based his answer on was his paragraph 89 in his original proof, which is a list of planning permissions and the numbers in those planning permissions and local plan allocations. The middle part of the table doesn't count the temporary permissions. And he adjusted it because of updates in terms of permissions. That's what it relates to. Now, the question is, do you accept that, or do you have a different view?
I'm not disputing the number of planning permissions, except for the point that's made by Mr. Woods in his evidence. There is evidence of a number of the sites not being lawful because they haven't, because we're planning, they've been implemented in breach of planning conditions.
Right, and this relates to the evidence in paragraph 89 of that table.
Yeah, and the point about that, sir, is that when you come to look at.
And can you identify those for me, or can Mr. Woods?
Well, Mr. Woods has identified them in his evidence, if you remember.
Well, give me a reference.
So
I
I
can
give you that, Inspector, if that helps. So it's
Yeah.
8.20. So what Mr. Woods does on his page 34 is he goes through the list of sites that are in Mr. Jarman's 89.
Yes.
And just to short circuit it, I think Mr. Woods would agree with me that in actual fact the numbers are the same. Where he comes on his 8.19 to 57, if you add the two that Mr. Jarman has taken you to in his 89, i.e. the ones that post date 31st of March 2023, Mr. Woods actually comes to 63 as well. If you add the 6 on for the two permissions that post date 31st of March 2023, Mr. Woods comes to 63 also. What Mr. Woods then does at paragraph 8.20 is he says that he thinks that there isn't he calls it a readily available supply in paragraph 8.20. And he says that because it appears to him that there are pitches which are subject to breach conditions, either pre-commencement or preoccupation. And that's why I focused on, when I gave you my response earlier on, that there just aren't any pre-commencement conditions that are breached such that you would say these permissions haven't been implemented. There are lots of breached conditions. And as I say, you'll see the evidence of what the council is doing in respect of those. But I had taken it on the basis of Mr. Woods's 8.23 on page 35, that his main issue was, he said, whilst it is considered the LPA may have met the identified need, i.e. met the need for those identified as meeting the definition, there remained the needs of the unknown households. And he then goes on to make his precautionary point, which he addressed you on, and the 64 households later on. So that's the way that Mr. Woods goes on to deal with it. But I think for this part of the discussion, it really is a matter of what's the situation in terms of permissions. Well, there are these permissions. Mr. Cottle raises a point about whether they've been implemented. I've said that they plainly they have. If you look at the definition, there's no clear evidence to suggest otherwise. And therefore, if we're looking at what the 5-year supply is and whether the supply is there to meet that need, then that's what I would say the answer is.
Sorry,
But
I was interrupted, so I'll go back if I may before Mr. Cockle comes back. To the point that I was trying to make, which is that you can't divorce the count of supply against the reality of what's on the ground. And the simple position is that you can't count the Lydia Park sites towards a supply in addition to the 55 supply when you've got in excess of 100 people on those sites who don't have planning permission without counting that towards need. So it doesn't, whatever the figure is, it's irrelevant when you take into account what's actually going on the ground, which is that, that there's a greater need than the supply just for those people at Lydia Park. So that can't be a supply for anywhere else. And quite clearly, those people came at the same time as those sites were being implemented. So in fact,
Where's the evidence of your appellants on that?
well, only so because as already been said, it appears that this has been a sudden surge
Yes.
based on the council granting these sites at Lydia Park, which seems to indicate to me quite simply that there was an under assessment of need and that these people were saying, well, we need a site for 2, but in fact their needs were far greater. And that's why the sites have never been set out in the way that they should have been in lawful permission, because they've just been overcrowded from day one.
But your planning evidence, that you're presenting is that of Mr. Woods and Mr. Rowe.
Yes.
There's nothing on this matter from Mr. Rowe.
No,
In,
so,
in terms of Mr. Woods, then, is your criticism of supply that is referred to by Mr. Lintott in terms of the conditions on some of the sites? Because you seem to be arguing additional points.
the evidence I rely upon it isn't just the evidence from Mr. Woods on this, it's the evidence actually from Mr. Clark. And that and table 3, which I've taken you to on a number of occasions, can't ignore the council's own evidence. And we say that demonstrates our point. But whatever, and it's a simple point, that the need on Lydia Park far exceeds the planning permission.
Yeah,
What
I want to know is your view on supply.
Well, so, but what I'm saying
We've
is
talked about need, and I've got sufficient.
I know, so, but you can't say that supply.
I know they relate to each other.
I know, so you can't say the supply for those sites on table 3 at Lydia Park goes towards the general need, because in fact it's arisen since the GTEA and is a substantial additional need. And therefore, if you're looking actually at the 5-year supply today, you've got to take into account the reality of Lydia Park, which is that all of those people on that site, only 1 in 3 perhaps, is on a lawful pitch.
Well, we'll come to I keep telling you, we'll come to Lydia Park. In terms of the table and the information that's presented by the local planning authority in paragraph 89, what is your view on those sites, the ones that total 79?
So I've said to you before.
They're not all Lydia Park.
No, I know, sir. I don't disagree with the fact that there are planning permissions for 72,
79
pitches.
Well, sorry, planning permissions for 65 and allocations for 14. Do you disagree with that?
I don't, no.
That's all I wanted to know.
I thought I made that point to you before, so, but
No.
I don't say that realistically, that goes towards meeting the current 5-year need.
That's a different point, Mr. Masters.
I know, but it's an important point. So because what we say is that what's demonstrated by the overcrowding on Lydia Park is that the need is far greater than the 63 that the council seemed to want to stick to from the 2017 GTA +2.
Okay.
So very quickly, we have photograph evidence from the High Court proceedings when an injunction was originally granted, when Mark Doherty and Matthew Doherty were on what is now Peel Site C and D, showing photographs in 2021, in 2022, with the land opposite empty. And then
Is
we
this before me? Has it been put in?
well, we certainly have one from Mr. Dudley's evidence from 2018, but we don't have I probably will find one before you of 2021. But the point that I wish to make is that my learned friend was quoting the definition of a deliverable site from the PPTS, whereas that is premised on sites with planning permission. And you've got the point that if a differently designed development is put in, different to the one that was authorised, there is a question mark over whether or not the planning permission has lapsed.
And what are you saying to me on that, Mr.
I
Cottle?
will check the photographs showing the empty field before what we see now in CW 16A under the permission 1866.
Yes, but what I want to know is what is your view on behalf of your appellant? Are you saying that the planning permission has lapsed? Or
The new GTA might find out that it has, yes. Certainly there is a question mark over the extent of the number of caravans is quite surprising on that area of land. 9 were allowed, I think, 1866, and there are 33 there. And the photographs show it was an empty field before.
I haven't seen the decision notice, but decision notices for these sort of sites are often for a change of use to a caravan site, and then there's a condition on the numbers.
Inspector, we certainly, I have no criticisms about the way Mr. Wood has put it in his evidence. It's perfectly transparent the way upon which he says that there isn't a readily available supply, and we've dealt with that point. It's never been suggested that these pitches that form part of the supply figure to meet the local authority's need, actually these permissions have lapsed. In fact, Mr. Masters has just told you that in his view, he's not arguing that these permissions aren't there. He's making the point that they're not there to meet the need that's been identified, and he's given you reasons for that. There's been multiple opportunities to put in either rebuttal or supplemental evidence. I do object very strongly to a whole new strand of argument being put, if that is what is being suggested at this stage, that, to be quite clear, we don't have a 5-year supply. Obviously, there'll be different submissions on other elements of need, but we don't have a 5-year supply on the basis that what we've put in at the first stage in the proof of evidence of Mr. Jarman is actually incorrect, because what he's identified as the supply there is actually a series of permissions which have in some way lapsed, even though no evidence has been put forward to this point, and the local authority is then given no opportunity to put in evidence showing how those pitches have been implemented or why they've suggested that those pitches are implemented. So I have to say at this stage, I object to that line of argument being.
So just to be, for my not to misrepresent me, well, I made an entirely different point, which is that in terms of deliverability of these pitches, if it's being argued, which I think it is, that because they haven't been implemented properly, but they're still extant, they can be delivered to meet the need. The problem about that, sir, is that you've got to be certain that they can be met within the 5-year period. And you've heard extensive evidence that that those sites are subject to some sort of enforcement action, although not a enforcement notice. And you simply don't know whether or not they can be vacated and be available at all at the moment, because each of those people on those sites will have a right of appeal,
Yes.
a right of contesting matters. And that's the point I was trying to make to you, sir.
Yeah,
Is the uncertainty.
you've already made that.
Yeah, I
point.
know, sir.
know that.
But it's just because it was misrepresented.
I think Mr. Woods wanted to come back.
Yeah, I mean, you referred to Mr. Jarman's evidence about who's occupying what, but we haven't got that evidence because the needs assessment hasn't been published. So we can't rely on something that's not been published. And moving away from Lydia Park, if you look at the allocations in the local plan, part 2, you have 6 allocations that are there. it's of interest to note that of the 6, 3 go through a surface water flood risk area.
Right, you've got 6. I think I've got 5 on the table. Which are you? What are you looking at?
Table 4,
I'm
in
looking
the
at.
local plan
I'm looking at
part
Mr.
2.
Jarman's list.
local plan part 2.
You're in the
So,
local plan.
The allocations.
Right, well, just give me the. I've got references DS 15 through to 19. So it's now planning commission.
This is why it's not in my list, but it's in the allocation. It's got kind of.
It's in the site allocation development plan policies, March 2023.
Right, but which reference is it?
Well, the 6 references, sir. DS 15
I've
through
got-
to DS 20.
So right, so you've got DS 20 as well.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Yes.
as I said earlier, it has a personal planning permission for a greater number than what's there. It doesn't have a permanent planning permission, so it can't be counted towards the allocations because it's not available for anybody else. And if you look at DS 15, Burnt Hill, my understanding from the appeal decision was that it was a travelling show person site.
Right, I'm surprised at that.
Well, Inspector, in terms of Burnt Hill, that was obviously the inquiry that we had in front of your brother, Inspector Willows, in the middle of last year.
Yes.
So the whole point of that inquiry was that there was an application put in for on an historic travelling show person site for considerably more than 3 pitches. And that enforcement inquiry that we held in July last year was to assess whether or not that was an acceptable arrangement to have more than 3 pitches. And the inspector refused, dismissed that appeal on the basis of the harm that it would cause to have additional pitches beyond the 3 that were going to be located on the old travelling show person site. So that deals with that point. In respect of the Tongham Road point, which you've just looked at, Inspector Willows also expressly decided the personal permission point, as you'll have seen from the
I've seen the
evidence
reference
on
to that, yeah.
So,
Yes, I do.
and in fact, in Mr. Woods's Appendix 6, the Tongham Road decision, it's dealt with within that decision, and we referred to that decision in front of Inspector Willows as well as to how those sites were taken into account to meet the supply, even though there were personal permissions. But in terms of the broad point about the allocations, which are in document CDA 6.7 and on page 165 of Local Plan Part 2, what Mr. Jarman has said is, with respect to him, correct. We've got 15 allocations in that table from DS 15 to 20, but because the Tongham Road was granted already permission for 3, then it will be double counting to keep that 1.
Yes.
So that's why it's actually 14 as of now,
Yeah.
and that's how you get the figure.
Yeah, thanks. Mr. Woods.
Yeah, it's
You
a
wanna come
personal
back?
permission, sir, so it can't be counted towards meeting the council's need.
That was the only point you hadn't made.
In respect to that one, sir, and as I said, in terms of Burnt Hill, it's a travelling show person site.
The inspectors,
I'm not
Mr.
sure that's
Lintott
true,
just
right.
described, said it's a development is not in accordance with the allocation because it was for 5 instead of 3, I think. But it was originally it was a traveller show person.
Yeah, so
site.
if you look at the allocation, which is on over the page for Burnt Hill on page 168, it says description: Burnt Hill is a former travelling show people site that has now become vacant. It's located on the eastern edge of Plaistow Road, about 1.5 miles south of Dunsfold Village, and then it describes the extent of the site. So it was a former travelling show people site that had become vacant, and there was actually then a decision to allocate it as a gypsy and traveller site.
But the reading my learned friend puts on the other decision of Inspector Orr is, with great respect, mistaken, because she wasn't endorsing the view of the previous inspector. She was just recounting, and then she arrived at her own independent judgment in paragraph 37 in saying that there's sufficient uncertainty about whether or not the council can demonstrate a 5-year supply.
So in terms of the
So she
personal,
was narrating what previous decisions had made rather than just condoning it. She arrived at her own independent conclusion. And we would invite you to share that conclusion, which is that the council can't demonstrate a 5-year supply, an
Well,
up-to-date 5-year supply.
well, we differ on the interpretation of her decision, but in terms of the personal permission point, that's on the next page where she addresses how those are taken into account. And I would submit, Inspector, that's exactly what Inspector Willows decided. He decided the only issue before him, actually, or one of the key issues, was whether the personal permission should be decided or taken into account, and he decided that they should be, and gave the reasons in the
Yes.
decision.
So, but it can't be in dispute, but it's almost an accepted meme that personal permissions don't count towards supply, because they can't, because as soon as they expire, that's it. They can't be used for other people.
That's precisely what Inspector Willow concluded against in paragraph 70, where his conclusion was that personal planning
Yeah.
permissions can contribute towards supply,
Yes,
Can and they can't.
can.
because his conclusion was exactly as you said, Mr. Masters. As soon as the people leave, the need goes away. So it counts
Yeah.
towards supply.
I've read what's been said
Yeah.
in that case, so I'm aware of the views.
Point again,
There's no need to make a point again if it's
So-
something you've already said, Mr. Masters. I want to wrap up on supply. I've heard your views. I intend to take a break now and then come back and deal with anything else on Lydia Park before we conclude on this. So adjourn the inquiry now and resume, please, at 4 o'clock. Which one?
Evening meetings we've got.
Oh, great. Yes, I think I have seen it, but that's very helpful. Thank you very much.
7 o'clock tonight.
So does that mean we can pile things up, or have we got to clear everything
Got to clear.
out of the rooms?
Yeah.
Right.
Um,
Could things
you
be,
can put more stuff in there.
could other parties too, so they don't have to take them away?
Yeah, I'm gonna check. for
It would be handy if they could.
We've got room, but I don't know about the, so I'll check.
Yeah, but I'll be all right leaving my
Yes,
boxes in there.
Yeah, you don't think yours.
Okay, thank you.
We're all cleaned out.
Yeah,
We
thanks.
can't leave them in the chamber.
No. You know, I'm happy if it's all right with the council for the appellants to put boxes in there, so they're not
Oh,
having to.
okay, yeah,
I mean, everybody can if they wish to, so they're all close at hand.
yeah.
Before you adjourn, sir, would you accept a copy of a decision that I referred to earlier that was going to be?
No, I asked for it to be when we were in session. Have you got it, Mr. Lind?
Yes, just giving me a copy of it.
Right, okay, put it in, please, Mr. Cottle, thank you.
Is the, techniques masters.
Oh.
That's yours.
Is that what I gave you originally?
Yeah, that's the file, it's the 3 copies for you.
So in relation to that, I won't be able to give you a reduction copy for me.
Well, we won't be up to that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, if you're on.
4 o'clock and time to resume with the discussion about Lydia Park on points that haven't been covered so far. Councillor Stern, you've touched on Lydia Park, and I know that in addition to the statement which you read to the inquiry, there was other documentation put in by Bramley Parish Council about Lydia Park. And I just wondered whether there was anything you wanted to say about that to make sure that the points you've raised were covered.
I don't think so. I believe the documentation we submitted is just a few photographs showing the Facebook.
Well, if I call up what you referenced as document 1, I think the others are similar. That's so documented 8 mobile homes for rent on Facebook Marketplace, 2nd of August.
Those were just the random ads we did. I think it was once a month. We just trawled Facebook to see what was available on that particular day. So those photographs are just the evidence that accompanies my statement.
Okay, so you've found those on Facebook,
Yes, Facebook Marketplace.
right? And do you have any information about occupancy on Lydia Park?
Occupancy.
And who's living there?
No. I would make one comment. I did take a brief look at the electoral register, and one of the names jumped out at me as being distinctly non-traveller, but I don't want to say more than that.
Right, so are you saying that you simply don't know whether they're people who are travellers and gypsies or other people?
No idea.
Okay. Right. Anything else you want to say about Lydia Park at the moment? I mean,
just one other thing, which I didn't mention in my statement, but which I possibly should have done.
yes.
The Bramley Neighbourhood Plan has which doesn't, it falls more into the environment, but Bramley Neighbourhood Plan has a dark skies at night policy. And as this is outside our settlement area, and I believe one of the other parishes has got some photographic evidence showing the whole place lit up at night like a seaside resort.
Okay. That probably relates to other things, and perhaps
Yeah.
one of the other parish council's witnesses will bring that up later on.
Yeah, I mean, my primary concern is the fact that it is so large now and expanded so fast, and it just totally dominates the community.
Okay, thanks.
I just wondered, sir, if you would
Yes, Mr. Cottle.
consider point really as to whether the planning permissions that were granted by the local planning authority, notwithstanding the local residents' feelings about over-domination, and whether the lighting is actually a product of that lack of conditioning of those sites. Because we have the officers' reports and the conditions that were attached to each of those permissions. And we can see the lack of landscaping in regard to lighting.
Okay. Yeah, that may well be raised later on, Mr. Coppell, but thank you for.
So that there is a, if I
Yes.
could just reply to Councillor Stern and it's almost via you, because whatever, I think what Councillor Stern is objecting to is not necessarily the numbers that were granted planning permission. It's the numbers that exceed planning permission and the expansion of the site beyond those numbers. And let me say straight away, it's not part of our case to justify the council's lack of action in relation to those sites. There's clearly been, and there is no plan for enforcement action. There's a breach of conditions, but there's no plan for any enforcement actions or any injunctions or anything like that, which would reduce the numbers overnight. The problem the council would then have is, where do those people go to? Which is why they've done nothing. But we're not, so we shouldn't be judged by the council's lack of action and the large numbers on those sites. We should be judged against the lawful permissions.
Sorry, judged against.
The lawful permissions on that site, not the unlawful situation on those sites. And I can understand local concern about with the numbers involved, which have already illustrated, and no action being taken.
Yes.
But that's a different matter.
Yeah. Okay. What I want to understand first of all on Lydia Park, I think, Mr. Masters, is what your position is in relation to Lydia Park and the numbers there. Because I think earlier on today, when you mentioned Lydia Park on a number of occasions, and I think you've used it in reference to part of your argument for a greater need than the local planning authority understands. Am I right in that?
I am, but I'm not sitting here justifying the legality of the.
No, I'm not
No.
suggesting that you are. I just want to understand where you're coming from in relation to Lydia Park. Now, what the inquiry is concerned with, this part of the inquiry is concerned with, is need for gypsy and traveller accommodation in terms of the latest version of the PPTS, which is the relevant version.
And I've made the point. Sorry,
what I want to know is, and you agree with that position. We're not looking at general residential need. We're looking at need for gypsies and travellers and other people who are. The actual wording is not just people who like to live in a caravan, but people who have a cultural tradition of living in a
A
caravan.
historic tradition,
No.
I think, is.
No, I've got the definition. It's a cultural tradition of nomadism or living in a caravan.
Yes.
Now, I think in terms of saying that the sheer numbers on Lydia Park go to need for those people, I just want to know how your appellant and the evidence you're calling goes to that. What do you know about the occupancy?
We don't know until the.
Well, I
GTA
want
is
to
done.
know. I'll give you an opportunity, Mr. Scott. I want to hear what Mr. Masters has made this point consistently throughout the day.
Yeah. So can I just? There's a crucial comma and an or, and all other persons with a cultural condition of nomadism.
Yes.
Or of living in a caravan. So it's
Yes.
got to be a tradition of living in a caravan, and that's why I use the term history of living in a caravan. How much is it? When does a tradition become a caravan? So it's basically back to the New Age travellers and people of that sort. It's not just gypsies and travellers anymore.
But who's living in them? Because you're saying it goes to need.
Yeah. So
and it demonstrates need. The numbers are there. You've made that point.
Right.
So
The presumption.
What do you know?
The presumption is from the evidence, and I go back to table 3. But apart from the one site that the council say isn't, there's no evidence at all that anybody but gypsy and travellers are living there. And even with the one site in table 3 where they talk about other people, that's based on. There's no evidence that that's based on the current definition.
Right, that's your interpretation of table 3. What I asked you is what evidence your side brings in relation to who's living there.
Well, the facts, sir, that it's a gypsy and travellers site. It's a series of gypsy and travellers sites, and it's overcrowded. And whether or not,
so there's no dispute that the pictures were brought forward as gypsy and traveller pictures.
no,
There's caravans on them, but what information do you have in terms of occupancy?
only the evidence provided by the council and by other people and by the parish
So
council.
you've no evidence yourselves.
No,
So it's your interpretation of what you've seen in the other people's evidence.
Yeah, well, effectively, sir, at the end of the day, the presumption must be that they're gypsies and travellers unless there's any evidence to the contrary. And there is no evidence to the contrary. And this inquiry has to be dealt with on the basis of evidence. The council, the only person that's made an assertion is Mr. Jarman. And that appears to be, sir, on the basis of evidence gleaned recently from a 50% GTA that's not being published. So he wants to get his knowledge of the site in via the GTA without actually disclosing what the GTA actually says, which is a rather unfair and cruel position. So at the end of the day, you have no evidence that they're not gypsies and travellers, and they're gypsies and traveller sites. So the presumption is
Well,
that
I've got no, I'll wait and hear, I'll wait till I've heard from everybody, Mr. Masters. I understand there's no evidence.
yeah, and so
as
the,
far as
the
that you're
presumption
calling.
must be one of illegality unless it's proved otherwise.
Sorry, the presumption must be,
One of legality unless it's proved otherwise. I mean, it goes a little bit beyond that, because what we know is that these sites were granted planning permission by the council on the basis of gypsies and travellers, and then immediately overcrowded by those individuals. No one's suggesting that the people occupying them aren't the people who made the planning applications.
okay, what do you say to them, to the evidence that Councillor Stearns put in about, from Parish Council about the adverts for accommodation?
Again, sir, there's
Is that how you would normally expect gypsies and travellers to find accommodation?
we know that a lot of the sites there aren't restricted in any personal way. They're general
Yes,
conditions. Okay?
yes.
And therefore, if a gypsy and traveller goes, why isn't it legitimate to advertise them for other people?
I didn't suggest it wasn't. I asked you whether.
My instructions are slightly different, which is.
I'll come to you in a moment, Mr. Cottle. Let me finish with Mr. Masters.
But sir, as I said, I can't really comment any further on that, whether or not they're advertised and then there's a selection process by the owner to make certain that they're gypsies and travellers that meet the condition that come along. I mean, the inference that the council was to take is that that shows a breach. Well, that might be an inference, but on the basis of a mere advert.
Are you disputing that sites are being advertised at all?
Have we seen the adverts?
Yes, it's been put in evidence.
Yeah, in which case,
You've had plenty
No,
of
I'm
time
not
to look at that.
No, I'm not disputing that.
So it seems to be that quite a number of caravans are being advertised for rent. That's the evidence that's been put in.
Yeah.
Right.
But the reality of the situation today, sir, I can say this from my own personal knowledge, and not giving evidence, is that there's a desperate need for gypsies and travellers to have accommodation, and one way they get accommodation is by replying to adverts.
May I make a comment here, please?
Yes, Councillor Stone.
We have several community notice boards in the area, and a lot of the several members are travellers. And a characteristic of a traveller Facebook account is the number of friends they have from all over the country. And usually if they want something or they're advertising something, they will do it on their Facebook account directly, not on Facebook Marketplace, unless they're looking for a specific vehicle or horse. So I'm not sure that saying that advertising on a general advert on Facebook Marketplace is what they would normally use to try and get somebody into one of their empty caravans.
So I disagree. I can give you examples of and individuals, I won't name them, who own caravan sites who advertise in that way.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Mr. Masters. Mr. Cottle, you wanted to come in earlier, so.
It's just on more on the question of whether alternative pitches exist. And it's a different question. It's in the balance. Whether
Right.
there's alternative pitches that are available. Because,
What, for the people on Lidger Park?
yeah. And the point is that my instructions indeed are that deeply private concern to have one's own space and one's own pitch with a fence around it for the purposes of the children and a family home, not
Yes.
living in a serried
Yes.
parking lot.
That's what gypsy and traveller sites often seek to get.
But that's what we want.
Yes, I understand that.
So could I just make,
But no.
sorry, but
no,
come back.
not, you can't just
I
shout.
wanted to clarify my point in a minute.
So what is your understanding then, or your client's understanding of the occupancy of Lidger Park?
We don't know exactly what's going on, but it's not something that we would regard as appropriate for us.
In terms of occupying?
In terms of a pitch for our family.
Yes, yeah. In terms of, well, in terms of its present layout, you're talking about that presumably rather than the
That-
planning permission?
Exactly. Well, of course, it's all in breach of planning control.
Yes.
And so
But,
it's
but if
totally
it was,
irrelevant. It's irrelevant, really.
if it was if it was laid out in accordance with the planning permission, would you necessarily be saying that?
That's an entirely different scenario.
Of course it is. Yes,
So
you're
I
talking
wouldn't-
about something that's
I wouldn't-
unauthorised.
Yes, and so but this is legally irrelevant if the local authority, accepting what the local residents are saying, which is that static caravans, which shouldn't be there in breach of planning permission, are being let out on the open market. That is strictly irrelevant to your decision.
So that's the point I was going to make, which is that I'm not justifying in any way, and I've tried to make that point to you before. Let's go back to table 3. I think that it's the pitch. The pitch is approved on WA 2020, where I think the adverts come from, are 7. The numbers actually there are 22. I'm not justifying in any way that excess. I don't know whether it's gypsies and travellers. I don't know whether it's other people that are there one way or another.
Well, the point that's already been made, which you see from column 5, is that quite a number of acres.
Well, that's what's asserted there. But again, there's really no evidence of that. It's just asserted in the column by Mr. Clark, but there's no evidence of that. Well, I don't know is the answer to that. That might well indicate that they haven't been very successful at renting them out.
Maybe.
I don't know.
If the layout is in breach of the original planning permission,
Yes.
then why would our clients want to move onto that site? It's jumping from the frying pan into the fire, sir, isn't it? You know, if they're not available and it's a site that there's far too many mobile homes on them, then why would they want to move there? Why is it available to them?
Well, so it wouldn't meet the criteria in law of being suitable, available,
Okay.
because availability, it's implicit. It has to be lawful for there to be a suitable, available site. It has to be lawful. So the suggestion that any of those would meet our needs is untenable. Suggestion, but I don't think that was the point you were asking me, sir.
It wasn't, no.
You were asking me what the evidence of that of those sites being occupied by gypsies, and I'm saying,
Well, you've already answered that
yeah,
question. I've got your note.
You've got the point.
And Mr. Cottle, I think you said you had a slightly different position from Mr. Masters on this, because his argument that's been put is that the number at Lidger Park goes towards the general need for gypsy and traveller accommodation. Now, is that a view shared by your clients?
We go from the starting point that unauthorised encampments can indicate a need for permanent provision within a borough. It depends on interviewing the people concerned.
Presumably it depends who's doing the
That's
unauthorised
right.
encampment, the
And
ordinary people.
there are a large number of unauthorised encampments
Yes,
that go wider than the number of Facebook adverts.
yes,
So they're not coterminous. And so we come back to the original point, which is that the unauthorised encampments do show or indicate a level of need that's not being catered for. But of course, we're not relying on the unauthorised statics that are set out like a parking lot.
Point I made before, which you picked up by looking at the definition, is that when Table 3 was made, it was based on the previous definition. There's no evidence that the council have made any assessment of who's there based on the current definition. And we say that it might well be that most of the people now occupying would be able to show a history or a tradition of wanting to live in mobile homes.
that's the position, isn't it? You don't, you've already said you don't know anything.
No,
about it.
but sir, it's an important supposition because I'm not saying it's for the council to prove, not for me in this instance, because it's their part of their case. And there's no evidence of they've actually made any inquiries or done any interviews. And the most we had is that there are breach of condition notices floating around. Well, that's all you have, and you're supposed to make a judgment on that basis. And we say that's no evidence upon which you could dismiss the potential legitimacy of their right to be there.
Should I come to Mr. Ward?
I think that's probably the time to do so, yep.
I don't know how you want to deal with this, just picking up on one point from Mr. Master then, saying no evidence of any inquiries by the council. We go through.
Carry on, Mr. Ward.
Did you hit, in case you didn't hear that, before we go through CW16, the last comment of Mr. Masters is no evidence of any inquiries by the council. I ask you to note as we go through CW16, the number of planning contravention notices that have been served on those sites.
No replies, are there?
There are no
Mr.
replies,
Masters,
but your comment was there are no inquiries.
I'm
I
trying
would
to
regard the PCN as an inquiry.
No evidence of any responses or any evidence of who they are, so that's the point I was making.
carry on, Mr. Ward.
Is the easiest way for me to deal with this is to literally to go through it as it is and very quickly just point to key parts in it, or do you have particular topics or particular issues?
I just want to understand what the council's position is in relation to Lydia Park and whether, but in slightly different ways, Mr. Cottle and Mr. Masters are concerned that making a point that what's happened at Lydia Park has a relationship to need. Now, what I want to know is whether what the council's position is in relation to that. Have you got any knowledge of what's you've put in information about the layout, and we can quite clearly see what that's like. But have you got any information which goes beyond that in terms of occupancy, in terms of the extent of vacancies and and so on?
Certainly, well, I'll try and run through and hopefully if I go off tack in that way, please
Right.
correct me.
Are you going to this 16A?
I was intended to go through CW16A. In terms of the broad picture of that, that's set out, and really CW16A updates the table 3 to which Mr. Masters has referred, because table 3 to which Mr. Masters referred to the previous version of CW16.
Right. So are you going to a table in the 16A itself?
So 16A itself now has 2 tables within it,
Right.
which are basically more up to date and more informative.
Right. What page? You need to give me page numbers if you can on those.
The 2 tables, so table 5 you will find on the back page, which is 22,
All right.
and then
That should be easy
table
to
4
find.
you will find on page 17.
Right. So table 5 of appendix 16A. And did you say table 4 was on?
And table 4 is on page 17.
Right. Which one are you starting with?
Really, in terms of those 2 tables, each summarises simply what I've entitled pitches not yet provided. So there's a breakdown between the number of pitches which are permitted under each of those decisions and the pitches which have not yet been provided on those sites. The reason they are set out in two different tables basically depends on the level of information which the council has about the sites. Although I think what's important to understand is clearly the situation on Lydia Park is an evolving situation in that the number of caravans has increased during the sitting time of this inquiry, and the council is trying to keep up to date in terms of who is doing what on which pitches.
So notwithstanding what we've been told so far about the excess number of caravans, there's evidence that more could go on some of the sites.
What seems clear is that some of the sites have got gypsies living on them and potentially within the pitches which were originally permitted. Some of them have got gypsies living in them, not necessarily in accordance with the layout and details of the permissions, but nonetheless there are gypsies occupying those sites. A great number of the statics far exceed any planning permission which has been granted, albeit that they are still a residential use of caravans with hard standings, etc., as described in the permissions. And certainly from the council's inquiries and observations is that not all of those statics are occupied, or certainly the last time they were checked, they were not all occupied. Increasing numbers are being occupied.
You mean not occupied
in anybody actually living in them at all?
So
many of them appear to be vacant.
Right.
Some of them do not appear yet to be connected to things like a gas supply as you would normally identify. Yeah. But that is clearly an evolving situation.
And the point that I asked Mr. Masters and Mr. Cottle about in terms of those that are occupied, you said that some have gypsies and travellers. Does the council have any evidence that other people are living there who don't meet the latest definition?
Yes, there is. I can go through it, but probably most obviously, if I give you one example, I'm hoping it'll leap out of the page at me. Go through a little bit more slowly. If we turn to page 7.
Same document?
Page 7 of the same document. Or pages 6 and 7, if you can flick between the two. There we are looking at a planning decision 2020-1866.
I'm on page 6 of 22.
6 of 22.
Yeah.
You have a location plan and then a photo at the bottom. And,
yes.
And the planning reference 2020-1866.
Yes, I've got that.
I described, and you will see when you do a site visit, that it's referred to on site as Yellowstone Park.
Yes, I can see the reference that, yes.
Now there I've included in the paragraph on page 6 that of the caravans you can count in the photo, there are 33 caravans 33. On the site. And then if we move on to page 7, you'll see that a PCN was served. No formal response has been received to that PCN, but in conversation, an agent acting on behalf of the site owner did acknowledge to officers receipt, did advise that 20 of the 33 caravans were occupied, so presumably 13 of them were vacant.
Yeah.
Here the maths don't quite add up, but of 18 households on the site were not gypsy and travellers. And that's on the advice of the agent. And one household on the site was identified as Romany gypsies.
Right, but so that deals with the point about ethnicity. What about, you do say did not meet the PPTS definition, but that seems to be because they're not ethnic gypsies travellers. Other people can meet the PPTS definition. You don't have to be ethnic gypsies or travellers.
The word he used actually, sir, was even narrower than that. He said Romany gypsy, as distinct from.
No, that's not what it says.
No, I know. That's what Mr. Ward said.
I'm interested in what it says in here.
Well, I'm recording back what was said by the agent on the site, so it's recorded there as accurately as given to officers at the time. Importantly, and again, I didn't meet the agent, so I can't
Yeah.
question his understanding of the definition.
Yes.
But as recorded, 18 households at the site were not ethnic gypsies and travellers
Yes.
and did not meet the PPTS definition.
Okay.
That was in May 2024, sir.
Yes.
So of course they may do now. Some or all of them may meet the definition as set out in the December 2024 PTS.
Yeah.
And so we have this is hearsay or hearsay. We have to examine the agent and his understanding of what the definition means.
I'm just seeing what evidence there is, Mr. Masters.
Yeah, my
Yeah.
quick answer to that is that clearly this evidence was put in
Yes.
and there was an opportunity for any follow-up on that or rebuttal should
Yes.
the appellants have chosen to follow that route.
Yeah. And I think, did you
However-
say there was something else, Mr. Ward?
That was the particular, that particularly addressed your issue of what information does it have. Now, of course, I can't tell you and I don't know if that situation is typically and is mirrored
Right.
by other, to extrapolate those percentages to other sites would be incorrect.
Yeah.
In terms of, short of going through, the evidence there is in front of you for you to read. What I've done on a site-by-site basis is look at the number of pitches that have done, taking a different one. I'm simply flicking to the front of the document, but on pages 2 and 3 of the document, we've got permission 2019-1265.
Sorry, which page, please?
Page 2 and 3.
Sorry, pages 2 and 3. So page 2 is it's a plan at the bottom.
Page 2 simply is a location plan
And a site
and an
layout.
approved plot layout plan
Yes.
and gives you the heading of 1265.
Yes.
On page 3, you've then got an aerial image of the site,
Yes.
which and bearing in mind this is a permission for 9 pitches laid out as 3 pitches in each of 3 rows. So you can see very clearly on that aerial image that there are 3 rows of caravans.
Yes.
As described, we've said, well, in that middle row,
Yes.
there appear to be 2 pitches laid out,
Yes.
similar-ish to the approved layout plan for the site. So
Right.
potentially on that middle row, there would be a vacant pitch.
Yeah, I can see the annotation about that. Yes.
And then to both west and east, left or right of that row, you have 2 very different looking strips of land where there is a large number of static caravans on each. But in the front quarter of each of those pitches, you have what appears to be a gypsy and traveller pitch with a large mobile home occupying a larger pitch, etc.
Yes.
Assuming, because I don't have the information, that those pitches are occupied by gypsies and travellers, it would appear that 4 of those pitches of the 9 in total are occupied legitimately by gypsies, but that there
I
are
see.
5 pitches there which are not occupied by gypsies at the moment.
Right, because it's got a consent for 9, is that right?
I'm sorry, I missed the question.
It's got a permission for 9.
It's got a permission for 9, yes.
So, Isabel, if I may just ask a question then, coming out of that of Mr. Ward. So, Mr. Ward, what's your understanding then of the best evidence before the inspector on this inquiry of what is taking place on that pitch?
The best evidence I've got from discussions with the council and from the aerial photos is that a permission has been implemented and that there are potentially 5 vacant or 5 pitches, not vacant at the moment, but 5 pitches which could be made available to gypsies and travellers.
Okay.
Could I just add through you, sir,
Yes,
that
Mr. Cookie.
page 2 of 22 has a layout
Yeah, I think,
according to the application, but we don't have that to compare with the other pictures that we've just referred to at pages 19, 20, 21. And if you go back to page 2 and you see that there are 3 pitches and that planning permission was for 3 static caravans being stationed in each row, then you turn to look at the photograph and you see that there are 2 large mobile homes in the middle row. And I can't see how you can say there's capacity for an additional pitch when you've got the 2 boundary rows, if I could call them that, with so many caravans when there should be just 3. And then you've got 2 in the middle and it's the whole pitch all the way down. I just don't see the capacity for an additional pitch there.
okay.
So more importantly, to be available and deliverable, there has to be some realistic prospect that they're going to be available within a time period of 5 years. What we know is that those sites are occupied. What we know is that there's planning
Well, I
permission.
don't think we do, Mr. Masters, do we? There's a question mark about occupation in terms of, because of the adverts and because of table 3.
Well, I
We-
don't think that was the evidence of Mr. Ward. I got the evidence of Mr. Ward, as I understood it, was that there are 9 caravans.
Oh, sorry, you're talking about this particular one?
Yeah, 9 caravans occupied, but there are 12 caravans there, so there are 3 are not occupied, but there are 9 occupied. And he's suggesting that that 4 of those caravans may be occupied by gypsies, and
Yes.
for some reason 5 aren't. But he hasn't addressed the definition and the fact that they may not be Romanis, but they might be other people with the tradition of living in caravans, which we simply don't know because the exercise hasn't been done.
If you,
But I
excuse me,
haven't finished, Mr. Ward. Please let me finish and then you can come back. Because the point I'm making, sir, is you can't judge that at this point in time. All you know is that the individuals there will have Article 8 rights. No one is seeking to evict them at this stage. And there'll be a huge process for evicting them if they want to establish the legitimacy for staying there, either because they're in compliance with the Planning Commission or they seek an amendment to the Planning Commission to cover their situation. So there's absolutely no certainty, realistic certainty, that those sites are going to be available any time within the time period specified by the definition.
Yeah, okay. Mr. Ward.
my comment was going to come back. Mr. Masters was suggesting or was putting words into my mouth about what I was saying about 9 caravans being occupied by non-gypsies. I don't believe I said those words, and nowhere within the paragraphs there does it give any details of occupation, either by gypsies or by non-gypsies. It simply looks at a photo of what's shown on site, indicates that there are 4 pitches there which have the appearance of gypsy pitches and could be occupied by pitches, and that there are 5 where other caravans, static caravans on site, and I say nothing at all about whether any of them are occupied or otherwise. There are potentially 5 pitches that could be delivered.
Well, I'd be really grateful to know what the definition of the appearance of a gypsy pitch is, sir, because it varies between gypsies, between Romanis, between Irish travellers, between Welsh travellers. We all have a different style. And there is no layout. So you've been doing these sites long enough to know that. Traditionally, in the old days, you'd say that the caravans were of a greater nature than the sort of hobby homes that you get from somewhere, but that's not true more recently, where there's been a problem with buying caravans.
Mr. Ward, is there anything else you wish to say about Lugia Park?
Not on that point. I'm happy to help you by going through any of the sites which are particularly helpful, but short of going through them page by page and looking at each site, those are examples of how
Yes.
we've looked at it in the information which is available. And my conclusion that there are a lot less pitches which appear to be gypsy pitches actually laid out on the site than the permissions allow for. And that many of those sites seem now to be being used by a large number of statics, some of which, on the basis of council's evidence, have been or are being advertised as available to rent with no seeming restriction on who occupies them.
There is
Thank
a
you. Mr.
slight
Cottle.
tension between breach of condition notices being served in relation to excessive number of caravans and also suggesting that there's an alternative pitch available in and amongst such overcrowded situation. Obviously, there's a fire risk, and it's entirely, I would suggest, untenable to be really contemplating additional caravans in an already overcrowded situation.
So the only comment I would make is all we've heard from Mr. Ward is interpretation of an aerial photograph. No evidence at all of who's actually living there, no names, no interviews, no replies to contravention notices, no evidence as to, with any certainty, that you could take a position with certainty that would assist you.
Inspector,
Mr. Linton.
yeah, what I would say that the evidence demonstrates is in terms of two factors. The first issue, 5-year supply, we've dealt with and looked at how the calculation is done. And in respect of this site, we can see from the way that the sites are laid out and the evidence, the best evidence that's been presented before you, that in 16A, that there are a large number of sites which are not laid out as you would expect a traditional gypsy pitch to be laid out, certainly not laid out as per the way that the site plan indicates they should be laid out. And there are various pitches which demonstrate various levels of compliance with the conditions. But in amongst them, you've got pitches such as that for which an enforcement, a breach of condition notice has been served at Appendix CW21. And so the council has got as far as taking that step in respect of that particular pitch. And just so that you know which one that is, if you look at the 16A.
Yes.
Page 20.
Yeah, it's on the final page of 16A, page 22. You've got the table, and the one that is being addressed in CW21 by the breach of condition notice is 2020-0516. So not only has the council got as far in respect of that site as saying that the site has the capacity to provide 5 pitches, but it's conducted sufficient investigations as to satisfy itself that breaches of conditions have taken place and it's served those notices. So that's why I came back to in the question for Mr. Ward, what's the best evidence? Obviously, you've got to form a determination on whether or not there's a 5-year supply. You've also got to form a determination of whether or not there are available sites. And in respect of that determination, we say it is relevant that you've got a series of pitches identified in 16A, which are at various stages of compliance with conditions. And indeed, in respect of some of them, the council are actually actively taking action to address the breaches of conditions, such as that one on page 22.
So 2 things that arise from that. First of all, the way a site is laid out, it isn't indicative one way or another of occupation by gypsies or non-gypsies. The reality is, and you'll know this from your own experience with doing sites up and down the country, rarely, as much as one wants it, are sites laid out entirely in accordance with conditions. Rarely. It then becomes a situation where the council tolerates it or doesn't. Because what usually happens in a lot of instances is that there are family members travelling on the road who have nowhere to go, and so they come and double up for a period of time. And we know doubling up occurs because it's regularly recorded as occurring in the GTEAs, as has been referred to by Mr. Jarman. And what we know is that the council may already have information about this doubling up on the 50% that's been done, but we don't have it because it hasn't been published. And so you're asked to guess on situations where actually there may have already been done some evidence on this and we'd know the situation. But because it's not been published, you don't know it. So why are we asked to guess when there's 50% survey already been done that would actually tell you? And that's clearly because the council have contrived the situation so that that information isn't before you.
I don't, you shouldn't make that assertion, Mr. Masters. You've got no evidence to claim that the council are contriving things at all. We've heard,
I say it's tactical, sir.
Sorry?
I've made the point already, sir, that it's tactical that they haven't completed the GTEA, despite their statutory duty to do so. And I say that is a matter before you, and it's a relevant.
That's simply an assertion that you're making, Mr. Masters.
Oh, well, sir, I say it's a conclusion you're entitled to come to, sir, based on the evidence you've heard and how it's happened, and the fact that you've got no evidence that anybody from the council has formally approved that. But the second point I was going to make, sir, is in relation to this, in relation to any breaches of condition notices, that doesn't vacate, free up the site. It just means that those people will be fined. They can still continue to do their actions. They'll be subject to a further fine at some future date if they do. But the only way to take realistic action against them is by enforcement or injunctions.
Yeah.
At some stage in the future. But that won't stop them making the point. Well, we've got a valid planning permission that's been extant because the council say it's been extant, and the people that are there validly can stay. So that doesn't free up any sites that are available. So the suggestion that in some way it'll free up sites because they're taking action is a nonsense. And if they realistically wanted to do something about it, well, they've got a good lawyer. They'd know what to do.
I think you said that, notwithstanding what's happened on the sites, they would have a valid planning permission on those sites.
Yeah. That's the council's case.
Yeah,
And you refer to it as well.
Yes.
You said that people who are there could argue that there would be a valid planning permission in place.
Yeah.
And therefore, presumably, your position is that the permission's been implemented.
I'm arguing so that they might very well argue that and take that position. Yes.
Yes.
I don't know because that there isn't sufficient evidence to come to any proper conclusion. But what one can say is that would clearly be a valid argument that they would take, and the reality is that wouldn't bring us to a situation where any of those sites would be available or deliverable because of the situation.
Okay. Did you want to come in, Mr. Cox?
well, just to clarify that, I mean, I'm not going so far as my learned friend Mr. Masters is in trying to cast aspersions about them deliberately not completing the GTAA. But what we heard from Mr. Jarman was that there was a choice, and what the council seemed to have decided to do was to try and kill two birds with one stone, which is to use the GTA as the basis for the next stage in the plan formulation. And so they've put it back in order for it to be aligned with the next stage of plan formulation. But that is a choice.
Yes. But I don't want to go back into the GTA. We've considered that thoroughly today. Just
On the point about evidence, if you look, for example, at page 20 of 22, which is the 2020-0516.
Sorry, 20 of 22. We're in the same document. 16,
That's right, CW 16. It's WA 2020-0516.
Yes, I'm
No,
there,
no.
Mr. Cottle.
And the point really is that there's no photographic evidence, and we do have a lot of photographic evidence showing that land empty. And we have the next photograph we have, is it laid out like that? And so when Mr. Ward says that it does not suggest that any pictures have been laid out as intended, there is a question as to whether or not the permissions were ever implemented, because that's how it was from day one on the photographs that we have.
So the second photograph, at the bottom of page 20,
That's right, yes.
says the below imagery was captured March 2025.
That's right. And so very recently laid out, and we have photographs of empty land there. And then we have photographs of it laid out like that.
So just to come back to that point, I do make the point that the council could, if they wanted to, they clearly don't, but if they wanted to, they could certainly serve enforcement notices on the basis that planning applications were never implemented on the basis of the evidence. And there's quite a powerful case for that. And yet they're also, they're seeking, they've made a choice not to do that, but they're seeking to persuade you of that position. But the reality of the situation is that they could have taken that action. That's why I say that they have a good counsel. He could certainly have advised them of those things, but that's not the position they want to take.
So, Inspector, I'd ask Mr. Ward to come, but seeing as this has been raised again, even though I objected to it previously, I'd ask Mr. Ward to come back on what the council's view is in terms of these pictures and whether they've been implemented or not.
If I can on that one, I will learn by the end of the inquiry. My view on that through discussions with the council officers, and clearly they've been thinking for many months in terms of how best to address the many breaches that are occurring on this site, was the council has taken the view, certainly on this site, and I think on nearly all the sites at Lydia Park, that these permissions have been implemented. The permissions basically being for the laying out of the sites, basically for the residential use of caravans, including lane and hard standings, etc. All right, they are specifically for gypsy pitches, but the actual development is the laying out of the site for the residential use of caravans and that. I haven't been party to all the discussions that took place within the council walls, but their views are that all of these planning permissions have been implemented. And that certainly in the case of the sites they're acting on now, that the breach of condition notice is the best way to move forward. I will just tie in that obviously the site we've just been looking at, 516, is the one, of course, which is the breach of condition notice that's set out in CW 21. You will note again, though, that in terms of my summary on pages 20 and 21 of CW 16, there is no information available about which of those caravans are occupied, if indeed any of them are occupied. And in this case, there's no actual evidence that the council's yet uncovered about caravans being advertised for rent, which evidentially this may now be overstepping the mark, but the fact that there's been no adverts for anything to rent would make it probably less likely that all of those caravans are occupied. Given that on sites where caravans have been advertised, there are still many that are vacant. So we have no information about whether the caravans on that site are occupied or not. The council does believe the permission has been implemented and the breach of condition notice is the best way to address what's there.
And finally, I think your tables 4 and 5, when you said the exercise, I just want to check there's no overlap between those tables.
They're set out separately, really on the basis of as the information was provided and presented to me, and on which we've got the council has better or less good information in terms of what's happening on those sites. But in terms of, and I think I put it in the supplementary proof, obviously you can aggregate those two tables in terms of the total numbers of permitted pitches, and on the basis of my work with council officers, the potential aggregate number of pitches that have yet to be provided.
It'd give you, would it 31, would it be?
It's
18 and 13.
18 and 13 is 31, yes.
So the council can't have it both ways. If you listen very carefully to what Mr. Ward just said, his assertion is that the sites have been implemented. And that could only be true if they were originally occupied by gypsies and travellers, because otherwise they haven't been implemented. So you start with the position that they're properly implemented by gypsies and travellers. Therefore, where is the evidence that those caravans not being occupied by gypsies and travellers? There isn't any, apart from assertions made by an interpretation of photographs of what a site should look like.
And what we don't have, sir, we have what it is like now,
Yes,
and the council serving a breach of condition notice.
yes.
We don't have what it was like when the planning permission was granted. We've got the layouts
Yes.
of how they were granted, but were they ever laid out like that? No, we've got no evidence relating to that there, and there are conditions that haven't been discharged, and there's a requirement if you don't comply with the conditions that the use ceases.
Well,
So
well, I
the
think
count, what we
that would
have
depend
is
on
that,
that would depend, Mr. Woods, on what the actual decision notice actually said.
Mm.
It's not always the case.
yeah, well, I did analyse it in my evidence, and nothing's come back on that.
Is
So,
that,
you
is
know,
that the
in the
information I
evidence
have?
that we've got going forward, what we
You
have
say you're
here,
aware of it. Is that information that's been put in?
that information has been put in my evidence.
Okay.
Yes, yeah.
We've got a number of the officers' reports relating to each of these decisions
Yes. In the evidence.
and in the evidence.
So Inspector, you've got what Mr. Wood says about it and his evidence at paragraph 8.20, and then you've got the rebuttal evidence of Mr. Ward at paragraphs 2.2 and 2.3 of his rebuttal evidence dealing with the conditions point, and 2.4. And in respect to what Mr. Master says, that you would need evidence that the site's actually been occupied by gypsies and travellers before you could say it's been implemented. I mean, that's just plainly wrong. So I'll just say that.
That's not true. Each has a condition to the effect that can only be occupied by people within the definition. And so even if these sites were laid out but then occupied by people only for rent, that wouldn't be implementing the planning permission. And I really can't believe the learned. That's possibly why they haven't taken proper action, because they're not getting good advice.
Right, I think I've heard all I need to in terms of Ledger Park. Can I just check if there's anything else anybody wishes to say? Mr. Ward? Okay. Councillor Stone, anything? Okay. Right, well, that concludes the round table session. And it's 5 o'clock. Sorry, is there something else, Mr. Woods?
Just that there was 8 hours on the parking and it runs out at about now, that's all.
Oh,
I thought this was a good time to.
well, 5 o'clock would be the usual time to finish.
Yeah.
Are you wanting to continue, Ms.?
No, I think he was
Mr.
saying
Cottle,
reverse.
he was just poking a bit of fun about the parking, because if we did go on further, then there may be a parking fine incurred.
I think all of us would be running out to feed the vehicle, because it gives you the option, sir, of 8 hours or 24 hours, and with a double charge if you go for 24 hours. So I don't think any of us did that.
Well, if we finish now, it assists in terms of Mr. Dudley, I think. Right. We'll start then tomorrow with the landscape topic. And can I just check? Is it Councillor O'Sullivan from the Parish Council? Yeah. So I'll put Councillor O'Sullivan to speak first, and then Mr. Dudley, and we'll move on to Mr. Woods and Mr. Rowe in due course. Anything anybody needs to mention before we conclude for the day? Mr. Cottle?
No, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Tubb? In,
Wait, I suppose why I'm asked just for witness availability purposes, do we think that we're going to get on to flooding tomorrow? I see we've slipped essentially
Oh.
an entire afternoon. It's just because we'd need to make Mr. Smith aware that he would need to attend tomorrow.
I doubt it, sir. But I
I don't know, it's, some of the timings I had to guess because I didn't get estimates back from everybody.
I've got a slight problem because I want to give my learned friend a draft condition before he
Yeah, well, I was
leads
going
his evidence. And I haven't got that draft condition because I haven't got Mr. Quigg
Quigg.
to draft it yet.
We've asked Mr.
So
Quigg to come,
I'm
sir, but
a
he's
bit
not
behind.
here.
I'm a bit behind on that one.
He's not going to be here till Thursday morning.
Who's that?
Mr. Quigg, he's the person who did the FRA, and we've asked him to come to draft a draft condition that yeah.
Right, okay. I suspect it's probably unlikely. The unknown really is in terms of the witnesses for the appellants, because we're dealing with a topic on which there's not a lot in terms of the proofs of evidence in terms of length. So,
Mr. Wood deals with flooding in his proof, as you
so-
probably.
no, I'm talking about landscape in terms of whether we.
Oh, landscape, sorry.
I just don't know how long that's going to take. We've got so it could be. No, it's a question of whether Mr. Smythe is needed to, because we might dispense with we might deal with the appellants more quickly than I anticipated. I was being cautious in terms of half a day.
Remember, sir, I will have Mr. Rowe as well on character
Yeah.
landscaping.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not suggesting there's a large amount in his proof because there isn't, but he will give evidence on it.
Yeah, probably unlikely, but then there's a lot to fit in, and I don't really want to lose time.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I think perhaps I will tell him that he ought to be here just in case we do get onto him. But it would be useful if there is going to be a condition that he could be considering.
Yes.
That could be provided as soon as possible. Stephen, are you saying that it's unlikely that Mr. Quigg is going to provide you with that before Thursday morning?
I'll take instructions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is unlikely, sir. I've already made
Okay.
inquiries with him in relation to that.
But it's not going to be until the second half of the afternoon in any
Yeah.
event.
So I suppose, yeah, I think it's probably best to have him here and
I
then
think so.
see where we go with
Yes.
it, Inspector. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Mr. Bentop. Okay, inquiry's adjourned. Sorry, just one final point. Just given where we are, the length of time we've taken today, would it cause anybody any difficulty if we started, say, half an hour earlier tomorrow? I mean, if you're travelling some distance, I don't want to cause problems.
I have a problem. This is the technical drawing
If it's a problem, I won't do it. I'm just asking if there's, I don't need to know all the details. Okay, 10 o'clock then.
All right. Thank you, Inspector.
Inquiry's adjourned.
Yeah, so I'll give you one survey, yeah, obviously it's tomorrow.
If you wish to leave documents in my retiring room, you're welcome to do so, because I think we've got to clear the council chamber.
Yeah.